We pray that that situation will be resolved there. We pray for the safety of those people who are in harm's way. We thank you for our military and for what they do for us, and for our policemen and all in law enforcement. We pray you be with them as well. So today we thank you for your goodness. And Father, we thank you for sending your son Jesus to die on the cross to pay for our sins. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Slama, can I ask you to lead us in the Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
No corrections this morning.
Thanks, sir. Any messages, reports, or announcements?
I do, Mr. President. The Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 697, 824, 795, 1147, 807, 698A, 804A, and 1037 as correctly engrossed and placed on select file. 824 and 1147 having E&R amendments. Senator Lathrop amendments to be printed to LB 1011, FA 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, and 79. New A bill, Senator Mosier, LB 984A, bill for enacting legal appropriations, appropriates funds aid in the carrying out of provisions of Legislative Bill 984. That'll be placed on general file. That's all I have at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would like us to recognize Dr. Joe Miller of Omaha, Nebraska, serving as today's family physician of the day. Dr. Miller is with us under the north balcony. Doctor, please rise. I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. General file 2022 Senate priority bills. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 519, introduced by Senator Moorfeld, is a bill for an act relating to public safety. Changes provisions relating to notice for petitions to change a person's name, provides immunity for certain alcohol and controlled substance violations by witnesses and victims of sexual assaults and persons cooperating with law enforcement, defines terms, harmonized provisions, repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 19th of 2021. Referred to the Judiciary Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Members, please come to order. Senator Moorfeld, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, today I'm honored to present LB 519, a bill to provide Good Samaritan immunity from certain drug and alcohol possession charges for people reporting sexual assault of themselves or others. It also gives judges the discretion to waive requirements for publication of name changes when doing so could endanger the petitioner. The bill advanced from Committee 8-0, and I want to thank all of my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee for supporting it. The bill prevents victims and witnesses from arrest or prosecution for minor drug and alcohol charges if they report the incident, the sexual assault, in good faith, request emergency medical assistance for a victim, and cooperate with law enforcement and the investigation. This legislation mirrors my previous legislation that provided limited immunity for drug and alcohol overdoses that this legislature has overwhelmingly passed 2 times in previous sessions. Since, Since the passage of that legislation, I cannot tell you how many Nebraskans and parents of Nebraskans suffering from drug or alcohol addiction that have reached out to me and told me that our law saved their or their loved ones' lives. This legislation was brought to me by the students of the University of Nebraska who told me very personal stories of their assault and then subsequent fear of reporting the sexual assault because they were under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time of the sexual assault. Since then, I've heard from Nebraskans across the state of all ages who have told me that. This is something that is a barrier to them reporting some of the worst and most brutal crimes against them. Colleagues, as someone who was sexually assaulted multiple times as a child, I can tell you that the fear to report sexual assault, even when substances were not involved, is real. The feelings of fear, anger, and shame prevented me from telling my parents of my assault multiple times from a neighbor by many months. And I was only a young boy at that time, not under the influence of any substances. So I can only imagine how some of our fellow Nebraskans would feel in those situations. That's why I brought this legislation. This legislation will benefit everyone, not just students. And the alcohol issue specifically will benefit young people, particularly college students I represent who are disproportionately sexually assaulted. By removing potential punishments for certain drug and alcohol charges, students who experience or witness sexual assault may be more likely to come forward and report to campus or local authorities. Alcohol or drug use should not get in the way of bringing someone to justice because of a sexual assault. Just as we removed barriers for Nebraskans seeking medical attention due to an alcohol or drug overdose, we should remove any barriers for Nebraskans who are sexually assaulted to report that assault so their perpetrator can be brought to justice and we can keep Nebraskans and our communities safe. Sexual assault is a widespread problem in many communities, but it is particularly evident on college campuses. Studies have shown that victims of sexual assault sometimes do not come forward to report a crime because they believe that drugs and alcohol will be addressed in terms of charges before the crime of sexual assault perpetrated against them. If more victims and bystanders come forward to report sexual assault, we can prevent perpetrators from assaulting others. I urge your favorable consideration of LB 519, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Morfeld. As the clerk indicated, there are amendments from the Judiciary Committee. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized to open the committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, and good morning, colleagues. LB 519 was heard by the Judiciary Committee on February 5, 2021. The committee voted 8-0 to amend the bill with AM 1781 and advance the bill to general file. The amendment would narrow the court's authority to waive notice for name change petitions. Under the amendment, the court would waive notice if the petitioner demonstrates that the notice would endanger the petitioner. We felt like the amendment was appropriate and the bill was consequential. It has been advanced to the floor by the committee on an 8-0 vote. I would encourage your support of both the amendment and the underlying bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Lathrop. Debate is now open on LB 519 on the pending committee amendment. Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I listened to Senator Morfield's opening there on his bill, and I appreciated his comments. I was wondering if he would yield to a question or two.
Senator Morfeld, yield, please.
Yes.
Senator Morfield, could you more specifically outline what alcohol and drug-related offenses would receive immunity under this act?
Yes, of course. I've got them right here. So Section 4 would amend 28-416 to include a reference to defense in the statute criminalizing possession of a controlled substance. So it'd be simple possession. And then section 5 would amend section 28441 to include a reference to defense in the statute that criminalizes the possession of drug paraphernalia. Because oftentimes when you're ingesting a drug, sometimes there has to be paraphernalia involved. So just simple paraphernalia. And then section 6 would include a reference to the defense in the statute in terms of alcohol for minors.
Okay, so how would a potential witness know what crimes they're immune to? How would they know that?
Well, there's a lot of public education campaigns on this. So for instance, when we introduced the Good Samaritan alcohol and drug immunity, there's been statewide campaigns on that, public access channels, universities, things like that. That being said, lack of knowledge of the Good Samaritan immunity is certainly a barrier to people utilizing it. And that's something that we work on to educate people across the state.
Okay,
Word spreads.
so was it, I believe when I read the bill, there was opposition from the prosecutors. Was that correct? Am I correct on that?
Yes, there was some opposition from some prosecutors.
What was their concern?
Their concern was eliminating their discretion to be able to charge people.
Okay, so your intent is to become the county attorney, which you would be a prosecutor then. Do you see that same issue that they had?
I personally would never prosecute somebody for bringing forth a claim of sexual assault. So I do not share their concern. And given that we passed the Good Samaritan laws for drugs and alcohol, and they supported those at the time enthusiastically, I don't think that we've seen any miscarriages of justice other than more people getting help and not dying.
So tell me what happens if we don't pass this?
If we don't pass this, we will have young people, particularly young women and some young men and older folks too alike, that'll be more scared of will continue to be scared to report sexual assaults if they are under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time. And so what we're going to have is we're going to have more people not report those crimes, and we're going to have more people experience those crimes because their perpetrators will not be brought to justice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm still open to listen to the discussion here, but I'm not real clear on if I'm going to vote for 519 or not. So we'll see as the discussion goes, and I hope it continues. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Arch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have questions for Senator Moorfeld, if he would yield.
Senator Morfield, yield, please.
Yes.
I'm not all that familiar with the Good Samaritan, the reference that you made there, that law. Can you compare and contrast that law with what you're proposing here?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So the Good Samaritan drug and alcohol immunity laws were passed, I think, respectively in 2015 and 2017 by this legislature. We actually mirror, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. We actually mirror the language from those Good Samaritan laws into this one. How those work is if you or somebody you are around is experiencing a drug or alcohol overdose and you call for medical attention, stay on the scene, and cooperate with law enforcement officers, then you will be immune from the drug or alcohol charges that would otherwise come if you're under the influence of them at the time. And so what that did was it made it so that people would feel more comfortable calling for medical attention. And in order to get that medical attention. And what it came out of was, I believe in 2015, my first year in the legislature, we had a young man die just a few blocks away from me in a fraternity. And one of the things that came out of that investigation was that he had overdosed on alcohol, but his fraternity brothers were too scared to call for medical authorities and medical attention at that time. And we had heard that from a lot of other people as well. So stepping back for a second, I just wanted to give you the context on that to answer your question. What this will do is the same exact thing. It's worded basically the same way, but what it includes is the reporting of a sexual assault either by the individual that was assaulted or by a witness or bystander who may have seen something leading up to that assault or the actual assault occur.
One other question. So the drug charges or the drug offense that may be witnessed by officers at that time, Senator Erdman, I think, asked you specifically what offenses. Would that include a DUI, for instance?
No.
So possession, is that I mean, possession or under the influence, is that what you would say are
No.
those offenses?
Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead. That's the question.
So it's possession. It's not under the influence. And if I said under the influence, I want to correct the record. It's the possession charges, which are generally, it depends on the type of drug, but for marijuana, for instance, that's an infraction. Second time, it's a misdemeanor, et cetera, and then it moves up. For some drugs, it's actually, depending on how the county attorney interprets it, it could be up to a class 4 misdemeanor or a class 4 felony. So these are serious types of charges that somebody may be facing, and that's why people are very reticent to come forward.
And so your bill would waive all of those charges, right? Or not waive, but I mean, they would have immunity from, regardless of the severity of that, of what they could be charged with, all of that would be immune.
Only for simple possession and drug paraphernalia. So, I mean, if you're distributing drugs or in the it does not make you immune from any of those more serious charges like distribution, things like that. Only for the simple possession charges, which depending on the type of drug can either be infractions all the way up to a class 4 felony.
Minor in possession, where would that fall?
A minor in possession, so that's in possession of alcohol, yes. I mean, so that would be one too. This is drugs and alcohol.
And that, okay, drugs and alcohol,
Yep.
and so they would be immune as well for
They would be
MID.
immune during that very finite period of time that the assault is occurring. So it can't just be like, we were at a party and there was
1
a
minute.
sexual assault and I happen to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. They have to either be the person that was assaulted or the witness of that directly. And quite frankly, there's some discretion still on the prosecutor to decide whether or not they're cooperating or whether or not they're actually a witness.
Okay, thank you. As Senator mentioned, I'm still listening as well, but thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Arch and Senator Morfeld. Is there any further discussion? I see none. Oh, excuse me, Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know Senator Morfeld and I spoke on this yesterday. I've been back and forth on making a decision here. I guess one of the advantages of each of you had is being able to sit through hearings and get to this point. And so I'm still kind of catching up a little bit on the fly. So I had questions for him yesterday on this bill. And I understand the reasons for bringing the bill. I think it has a lot of merit. But I think like the two previous senators, Erdman and Arch, that there's questions about how this all works. And I want to make sure that we don't complicate and hinder prosecution in any way by or allowing, say, drug dealers from coming in and being a witness and walking from something that they should have been prosecuted for. That's the piece that I'm wrestling with. But yet I also fully understand the intent in which Senator Morfeld brought the bill. And I do have concerns, and I think particularly as it relates on college campuses, this is a problem, and I'm interested in making sure that we see justice as well. So I too am going to listen through the debate and try to get to a green vote on this. But I like the amendment that we're debating now. I think the amendment took some concerns that I had away. So I will vote for the amendment and then see where we go when it comes to the bill itself, LB 519. So again, I appreciate Senator Morfeld bringing it, and I really concur with my colleagues on some of the concerns. Hopefully we can work through that as we go through this process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Any further discussion? I see none. Senator Lathrop, you recognize to close on the committee amendment. He waives closing. Question will be the adoption of the committee amendment, AM 1781. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
33 ayes, no nays on adoption of the committee amendment.
AM 1781 committee amendment has been adopted. Any further discussion on LB 519 as amended? I see none. Senator Morfeld, you recognize to close on the bill, on the advance of the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I appreciate all the thoughtful questions on the floor today. I remain open to any other questions between now and select file. I just want to note that, again, this is a very limited, very limited Good Samaritan immunity. It's been proven over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of working for drugs and alcohol. It has not been abused. And I think that this is something that we need to extend to victims of sexual assault, because we hear from Nebraskans telling us that they are afraid to come forward to bring their perpetrators to justice. And that is something that we need to eliminate any barriers to. And I'd appreciate your green light vote. And if you have any questions between now and select file, I'm happy to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Morfeld. Senator Archer's speaking light is on, but I cannot recognize you. Senator Morfeld is closed on the bill. The question for the body is advance of LB 519 to an ENR initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
29 ayes, 6 nays on advancement of the bill.
LB 519 advances. Moving to LB 598. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 598, introduced by Senator Wishart, is a bill for enacting relating to the Department of Economic Development, adopts the Small Business Stabilization Grant Program Act and declares an emergency. Bill was read for the first time on January 20th of 2021 and referred to the Business and Labor Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments. There are other amendments as well, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Wishart, recognized open on LB 598.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here today to introduce my personal priority bill, LB 598, the Small Business Stabilization Grant Program, or as I like to call it, the Main Street Recovery Act. I represent in District 27 a diversity of businesses, including those that exist in the historic Haymarket. 2020 into 2021 was devastating for the bar, music, and restaurant industry, as well as many other businesses in the service industry. Many bars I met with were experiencing over 50% revenue loss, some over 90% revenue loss caused by the pandemic and the following shutdowns. While there was federal relief that came to them, to most of them, it was frustrating to be out of session and unable to pass legislation on the state level to help our small businesses get through this extraordinary situation. So I got to thinking, how can we set up a targeted system of relief for the future where we have an emergency fund in place to help small businesses in Nebraska who experience devastation from a natural disaster or an emergency? This way, when we encounter flooding, wildfires, or a future pandemic, and our legislature is out of session, our state has a mechanism in place to provide immediate relief. I was reminded when drafting this legislation of other legislation that we passed several years ago by Senator Erdman. It was championed by Chairwoman Linehan and passed unanimously by the body. It provided property tax relief for people who had lost their property from flooding. LB 598 is channeling that same type of legislation. In this case, we are providing recovery support for our Main Street businesses in emergency situations. I met with many stakeholders on this legislation from the business community and the Department of Revenue, as well as had discussions with the Department of Economic Development when I put this legislation together. And we looked at all different types of mechanisms for how we could have a system in place to help Main Street businesses during a natural disaster have the cash flow they need to survive and get through. I decided that we didn't need to reinvent the wheel and create a new program. Our governor and his team, with Director Goins leading the way at Nebraska Department of Economic Development, had already created a small business stabilization grant program during the pandemic to channel federal relief to small businesses. And this fund really worked. And I have to give a lot of credit to Director Goins and the leadership of the governor in quickly being able to get relief dollars out to many businesses across the state. So my thought is, since this has worked and we've used it in an emergency situation, we should codify this program into law. So here's how the fund will work moving forward. We create the Small Business Stabilization Program, so we codify what has already existed for the pandemic through Department of Economic Development into law. So following a natural disaster or declared state of emergency by the governor, the Department of Economic Development has the ability to award grants to businesses physically located in Nebraska. Now, these are small businesses, so the parameter is that they can have no more than $1 million of gross revenue in the most recently completed calendar year. This is targeted for our small Main Street businesses. And then businesses must also show sufficient documentation that gross revenue over a period of 1 month or more has declined by at least 50% from the amount of gross revenue received over the same period in that year. And then the grant awards can be no more than $12,000 to any one business. We can fund this program to the amount that we believe necessary to help our small businesses recover, similar to the way that we fund the governor's emergency fund, to give him or her the flexibility to help communities during natural disasters. While I included initially, when I first introduced this bill, an appropriation of $20 million, that was when we were in the pandemic, and it was when not all of the federal relief had been received. The committee amendment that the committee brought removes that $20 million. I'm okay with that at this time, though should this legislature decide that from the ARPA dollars or additional cash reserve that we have, we would like to put an influx of cash into this emergency program, should this legislation pass, I would be open to that as well. But I do want to tell you that for the time being, this is setting up the program and we are not funding it at this moment. LB 598 was heard by the Business and Labor Committee last February. It received a broad range of support, including the Chambers of Commerce, Nebraska Bankers Association, and the Lincoln Independent Business Association. This bill received no opposition, and with the committee amendment, has no fiscal impact immediately. Main Street businesses in Nebraska are vital for our economic vitality. We must have a system in place to help them recover when our state experiences natural disasters or pandemics. This grant program is one necessary step in ensuring our state helps small businesses survive. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I encourage you all to give a green vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Wishart. As the clerk indicated, there are amendments from the Business Committee. Senator Blood, as Vice Chair of the committee, could you offer the committee amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, I bring forward AM 549, which is a friendly amendment that was brought to the committee and adopted at the request of Senator Wishart. The amendment simply gets rid of the appropriation brought in the original bill. In practice, a specific fund will be created but not funded until the legislature chooses to do so. So that if a state of emergency happens in the future, like the COVID-19 pandemic, we will have a designated shell fund available to provide relief to small businesses if this body decides it is necessary to do so. With that, I would ask for your green vote on AM 549.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, I have a note from Senator Hunt. She wishes to withdraw AM 2126.
Amendments withdrawn. Debate is now open on LB 598 and the pending committee amendment. That's right. Senator Urban.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Wishart, for your explanation. I had just, I reviewed the amendment by the committee, and so you're striking the 20 million, is that correct? Would you
Wishart,
yield to the
please.
question, Senator Wishart? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Senator-
yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
All right. So you are starting a new program. Is that also correct?
I am continuing a program that existed during the pandemic.
Okay. So when you struck the 20 million, I understand that, but I had a question, and maybe this is rhetorical, you can decide. The appropriations was 20 million for the project, and then there was 750,000 for implementation by DED. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
So being on the Appropriations Committee, what I'm about to ask you won't probably surprise you. Did you find that to be exorbitant, 750,000 to implement this program?
I have not had a chance to speak with the department specifically about that, but I do think that this program has already existed. And again, it's just for emergency situations. It should not require full-time staff.
Right. Thank you for answering that. I just want to draw your attention to that. We have a lot of appropriations bills that come to the Appropriations Committee. And for example, the ARPA money for the distribution of that, they've put in $15 million to decide who gets the ARPA money or distribute it or to check up to see if it's been done correctly. So we see these things come all the time with exorbitant fiscal notes about what it costs to implement it. And in many cases, there are people in these agencies who are already in place to do this. And it bothers me some that they come with these exorbitant numbers that don't mean anything. So anyway, thanks for answering those questions, Senator Wishart. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban and Senator Wishart. Senator Dorn.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Would Senator Wishart yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, yield, please.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this bill. I got a couple questions I would like to ask. So number one is, I think you talked a little bit about an emergency has to be declared by the governor. For example, that would have included the flooding that we had in 2019. Okay. Then the other thing is, right now, this bill, as I understand it going forward, we're starting the program, just as Senator Erdman said, but there is not or will not be funding out there for it. How do you see that happening, or will the emergency have to be declared and then we fund it at that time, or what's going to happen?
No, so ideally, this program can work very similar to the governor's emergency cash fund. So let's say we anticipate that more floods are going to happen in the spring. Let's say next year we anticipate that. The legislature in next January could say, we're going to put 10 million into this fund that when flooding occurs, the governor and DED will be able to utilize it to help some of the businesses that maybe lost their entire business. Just get through that period until they can get back up and running.
And this is the way I understand it. The federal funds that were used, the governor had proposed for it, they were to help those entities get through that part of COVID.
Yes.
Yes.
They were a short-term grant that went out to all small businesses that had experienced devastation due to the pandemic.
One other question, because part of what happened during that funding when it went on at that time, and I don't know if this is the same type program that was asked then, I had several, I call it small restaurants or those types of things, come up and told me because of certain things they do, sometimes they don't qualify for some of those, they didn't qualify for some of those funding programs. This here, though, this here puts in there just a stipulation that as long as they had half the revenue loss and that they were under $1 million. So then maybe those type of businesses would qualify for this.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Those are the type of businesses that I'm targeting with this program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thanks, Senator Dorn and Senator Wishart. Senator Linehan.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand the intent here, but I'm concerned if the governor was able to do this during the pandemic. Well, this is what I'm concerned about. We put something in law and we forget about it. And 10 years from now, when we're trying to be nimble and work with the federal government and distribute funds, this doesn't become a helping tool, but actually ties the hands of the then administration and the legislature is exactly what they can do. And I will hopefully, I'm not going to ask her to respond, but hopefully she can explain why, if we were able to do all these things during the pandemic and the flooding, why do we need to put something in statute that we may be forgotten about until we need it 20 years from now, and then maybe $1 million isn't near enough, and we disqualify a bunch of I don't know. I don't understand why this needs to be in statute if we already have addressed these issues without the statute. And I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thanks, Senator Linehan. Senator Clements.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Wishart yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, yield, please.
Yes.
I was wondering about comparing this with the governor's emergency fund. Why wouldn't we just allocate some more money for his emergency fund? instead of doing this.
Well, this takes a program that was put in place by the governor for the pandemic, and it says this program worked. It worked very well. And so why wouldn't we set this up for the future? And not just to help in terms of pandemics, but to help in flooding or other types of natural disasters that we have an expectation the state is going to experience in the future.
Does an emergency need to be declared by the governor for this bill to take effect?
An emergency does need to be declared, yes.
By the governor, but not federal, just state?
Yes, by the governor of the state, because there are some things like flooding, for example, that may not impact the United States.
Was the $1 million gross revenue a factor that was used by the governor?
No, that's a factor that I put in after consultation with a lot of the business community, recognizing that with limited funds, we want to target small businesses.
All right, thank you, Senator Wishart. Maybe that does help, but I do agree with Senator Linehan that it's somewhat duplication. Hopefully we don't forget about it, but the amendment to remove the 20 million does help me in supporting this now. It's going to be available if we need it. I'm not 100% sure it's all that necessary, but I guess I'll listen to debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Clements. Senator Ben Hansen.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the AM 549 and the underlying bill, LB 598, and I encourage my colleagues to vote green on both. I appreciate all the work Senator Wishart has put into this bill, and the amendment does alleviate a lot of concerns that people had with the funding of this bill. But what, in essence, this bill does is set up the framework of relief should the occasion ever arise in the instance of an emergency such as a flood that the administration can use if needed during an emergency to help the citizens of Nebraska. And so I appreciate the framework that she's thought of in this bill. So I encourage my colleagues, everyone, to vote green on AM 549 and the underlying bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Is there any further discussion? I see none. Senator Hansen, did you care to close on the committee amendment? She waives closing. Question for the body is the adoption of the committee amendment, AM 549. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
40 yeas, no nays on adoption of the committee amendments.
AM 549 committee amendment has been adopted. Any further discussion on LB 598 as amended? I see none. Senator Wishart, you recognize to close on the advance of the bill. She waives closing. Question from the body, the advance of LB 598 to ENR initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
32 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill.
LB 598 advances. Proceeding now to LB 1023. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 1023, introduced by Senator Hilgers. The bill for an act relating to water adopts the Lake Development Act and the Water Recreation Enhancement Act and declares an emergency. Bill was read for the first time on January 13th of this year and referred to the Natural Resources Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Speaker Hilger is recognized to open on LB 1023.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'm very pleased and honored to open up on LB 1023. And I might start this morning maybe on a note of gratitude. I really appreciate all the number of people who have assisted in the making of 1023. I want to thank specifically Senator Mike McDonald, who has made this his personal priority this year. I want to thank the members of the Star Wars Committee, Senator Flood, Senator Gregor, Senator McDonald, Senator Bosselman, Senator Brandt, Senator McAllister, Senator Wishart, Senator Hughes, who helped work long hours over the summer and fall last year to get us to this point. I want to thank all the members of the Natural Resources Committee and the number of stakeholders around the state, from Game and Parks to MUD to City of Lincoln to others, Friends of Knox County, the Keith County Economic Development Group, for all of their amazing input to get us to this point. And I want to also maybe start with a note of gratitude for all the amazing recreational opportunities and beauty that we have here in the state of Nebraska that my family and yours are able to take advantage of around the state, from Lake McConaughey to Lewis and Clark to Mahoney State Park. And really those jewels in our state are the products of decisions made by generations before us. If you think about Mahoney State Park, or you think about Lake McConaughey or Lewis and Clark, those are things that were created decades ago in the 1930s or the 1950s. And really, this is an opportunity for us to be able to stand up and help provide new opportunities for the next generation of Nebraskans and for generations to follow them. And so I wanted to start there of a note of appreciation and gratitude before I really get into 1023. And as I start the discussion of 1023, I want to take a little bit of a step back and just remind the body what it is that we were trying to accomplish. So when we came into session last year, Senator McDonald had introduced LB 406, and we had a significant conversation on the floor. You may remember last year, Senator Flood got up, Senator McDonald, Senator Gregor, and others about transforming LB 406 into a broader task force. And that is what we've been talking about for the last year, the Star Wars group. And we talk about Star Wars, and it's a great name. I think Senator Gregor's wearing his Star Wars shirt today. But Star Wars means something very serious, which is the State Tourism and Recreation Water Access Resources Special Committee. And really was a collection of senators, 10 senators from across the state, with a mix of ideological backgrounds and views, coming together to find opportunities to enhance the natural resources and beauty of the state that we currently are in. And we worked over the summer and fall together collaboratively with our consultant to determine what kind of projects might make sense for the state of Nebraska. And we identified a number of those. And we were tasked by the legislature to look at 3 specific areas. One was Keith County and the Lake McConaughey region. Another one was in Knox County, Niobrara on the west, the state park, as well as on the east, Lewis and Clark Lake, and then also the Lower Platte South region. And we were looking at our water resources in particular, looking for different things. We were looking at flood control. We were looking at recreational opportunities. We were looking at water sustainability. And we were tasked by the legislature to find ways to potentially catalyze additional economic opportunity throughout the state. And by the way, Senator Clements, I apologize. I'm thankful for you too, Senator Clements. You were on the committee. I neglected. I knew I missed one. And that was what we were tasked with. And I think that's what we accomplished. And as we came into this year, the committee presented, and I'm very proud of a unanimous vote. The committee recommended to the legislature. We recommended to the governor and then subsequently to the legislature and the Appropriations Committee a number of projects in all those areas. One of the series of projects in Keith County, and maybe the cornerstone of that is the new marina that we've proposed in Keith County. If you've been in Lake McConaughey, if you visited there, it's the number one tourist attraction in the state of Nebraska. Almost 2 million visitors come to visit Lake Mac every year. Most of those come from Colorado, bringing in tax dollars from out of state. And access to the water on Lake Mac is actually very difficult. And in order to scale the economic development in Lake McConaughey, we are proposing a development of a marina in Lake Mac, as well as a number of amenities, road work, and the like there. In Niobrara, or Knox County, I should say, we're looking at how do we enhance the projects around Niobrara State Park. One of the most beautiful views in the entire state of Nebraska is at Niobrara State Park. It's actually where the committee held one of its hearings. There's opportunities to build potential new lodging, recreational facilities in Niobrara, additional access to the waterway, and then Lewis and Clark Lake, which is absolutely gorgeous and not too far of a drive from here. We're looking at expanding marina access in Lewis and Clark Lake. There's a number of other proposals, including very significantly, and I want to specifically thank Senator Bosselman for his work in this regard, helping additional flood control proposals around the Wahoo Creek and jetty system near Schuyler. In addition to that is the potential for building a potential new reservoir lake between Omaha and Lincoln, which is something that we've been talking about for decades, and we really are presented the opportunity here to take a significant step forward, not the only step that we'll need to take under LB 1020, that we'll need to take in order to accomplish it, but a significant step forward in LB 1023. And I want to talk about that, and I'll talk about sort of what is in the bill and what's in this phase that we're currently in, and I'll do that here in a second. But I want to just flag as we start that the approach of the committee and throughout this process has been one of abundance and one that's a win-win-win, something that's not zero-sum. If you think of the previous proposals to build a lake or do some of this work that we are contemplating here with LB 1023, it's pitted groups of Nebraskans against one another. It's pitted people in the city of Ashland against the legislature, or people who have built smaller reservoirs around that area, or have invested dollars into economic development around that area against the Nebraska legislature. And I'm very proud to say that the supporters of this proposal, the supporters of this project include the city of Ashland and include a number of others who otherwise would be potentially adversely affected. And the reason why that is because from the very beginning of this process, we have listened, we have worked together, and we've tried to find winning solutions that accommodate everyone's concerns. So where are we here today? Where we are today is what we are asking the legislature to do is really embark on phase one of the potential projects. And within phase one, there are two tracks. One track is not actually in front of the body here this morning. That track is within the Appropriations Committee. And I've had a number of conversations with Chairman Stinner and other members of the committee about the potential for an appropriation to help move these projects along. And for the lake in particular, it would be the necessary dollars to study and do design work and to really make sure that this is a feasible project. We have done some preliminary analysis with our consultant, but in order to do something of this magnitude, you really have to dive into the details. So one track is making sure that there's the appropriated dollars necessary to be able to design and do those studies so we know that this project actually could work. The second track is under LB 1023. And LB 1023 at a 10,000-foot level essentially directs the Director of Natural Resources to start down the road of exploring a potential public-private partnership. And what we are contemplating is a public-private partnership that would elicit well over $1 billion of additional private investment into the state of Nebraska. But it takes time to think through that, to think through what the business plan could look like, to think about exactly how that might be executed. So those are the two phases. Those are the two tracks of phase one. Probably take 2 or 3 years to be able to accomplish. If we get to the end of those 2 or 3 years and phase one's complete and everything checks off, then the legislature can take the next step. Hopefully that would be actually the development of the lake. But there's a number of ways that this could become unsuccessful. For instance, if we do a hydrology study and it turns out that the impact is not what we think it would be on the city of Lincoln's water supply, as an example, that would mean we wouldn't be able to go forward. If there's an environmental concern, are going to do that study, that would mean it wouldn't go forward. If we can't actually go and get the $1 billion plus of private investment into that area, then it wouldn't go forward. If we can't acquire the land, then it wouldn't go forward. And so what we're asking the legislature is to take yet just one more step. It's a significant step. We've already taken a number of them, but it's one more step in a journey towards trying to be able to create a new opportunity for all of Nebraskans to enjoy. And as we think about where we sit here today and the competitive nature of around the country, where people want to live, work, raise a family, the ability to have quality of life and recreational opportunities for families of all backgrounds, all socioeconomic backgrounds, to be able to enjoy here between our two biggest cities here in the state of Nebraska, I think would be transformative. Thank you, Mr. President. So as we get into the debate today, I'm looking forward to the conversation. There's a number of changes in the committee that the committee amendment has. There's actually another amendment that we've been working on. There's been some technical recommendations from Senator John Kavanaugh as well as Senator Wayne. I appreciate their comments and input on this particular bill that we're working on for a potential select file amendment. I'll get in the queue and talk through some of the additional benefits and the testimony that we received, and also talk through some of, I think, the misconceptions of some of the arguments against it that I've heard, and really talk through in a fact-based way that I think this could be a really transformative win-win-win opportunity for the state of Nebraska. And I'm asking for your green vote at the end of the day to be able to allow us to take that next step really in this phase one process to see if we can actually transform the state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before proceeding, Senator Vargas would like us to recognize 6 members of March of Dimes of Omaha. Those guests are with us in the North Balcony. They can please rise. I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. As the clerk indicated, there are amendments from Natural Resources Committee. Senator Bosselman, you recognize to open the committee amendment.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I would like to give a shout out to Rogue One, Senator Clements. Senator Speaker Hilgers left him out when he initially spoke of who the committee members were on the committee, but we'll call him Rogue One. In all seriousness here, good morning. I'm offering committee amendment 1914 to AM 1023, introduced by Speaker Hilgers. I am pleased to support LB 1023, which provides for protects in each of the locations explored by the Star Wars Committee. AM 1914 is a white copy amendment, which adds language to show the intention to adhere to the requirements of LB 406 that protect or projects not to be built by damming the Platte River or flooding surrounding communities. It also encourages public-private partnerships and includes provisions to engage local stakeholders in the development process and a conflict of interest provision regarding public-private partnerships to provide greater transparency and build trust within the communities and the public. Finally, the amendment extends the Star Wars Committee to 2026 and removes the appropriations provisions that were a part of the original bill, but that did not identify an amount. I urge your green vote on Committee Amendment 1914 and the underlying bill of 1023. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bosselman. Debate is now open on LB 1023 and the pending committee amendment. Senator Flood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, members. I want to start by saying I am wholly in support of what the Star Wars Committee has done. I want to thank Speaker Hilgers, Senator McDonald, all the members, all the time. You may not know this, but last year there were 3 different groups looking at different options. One was a group of people that have been assembled in Ogallala and Keith County talking about Lake McConaughey. Senator Gregert and I, before I got in the legislature, were lamenting the loss of the Core Discovery Center, which is just south of Yankton on Highway 81. We toured the Santee Reservation. We met with officials from the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. And as I said last year on this floor, the most beautiful spot in Nebraska is to stand at the Eagles View area of Niobrara State Park and look at the confluence and the beautiful scenery of the Missouri River and the Niobrara River making its way eastward down the northeastern ridge of Nebraska. If you find my Facebook page, you look at the profile picture, it's a picture of perfection. It's the same area that Chief Standing Bear chose for his home. It is magical. And for decades, Nebraskans have not made the investment, in my opinion, the most beautiful place in the state of Nebraska. Something that you would not imagine in a million years existed. Looking out over the valley there, this proposal that you see before you builds an event center, a lodge, together with partners like the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, subject to the fine tuning. And it also goes from essentially 100 boat slips at Wygun Marina to 700 boat slips. Yankton and South Dakota has had their way with tourism for far too long. And this is our chance as Nebraskans using these dollars to become very competitive, to create economic opportunity in a county that needs it, in a county that needs a shot of something that creates more opportunities for Nebraskans on the Nebraska side of the river. I also want to comment on what Senator Hilgers and Senator McDonald have championed in between Omaha and Lincoln. The data shows that the more you increase water recreation, the more amenities you offer, the more opportunities you make available for water, lakeside living, water recreation, you attract a skilled workforce, you make it more attractive for people to live, work, and play. Omaha and Lincoln have the greatest amenities in our state when it comes to the size of the population. This is big thinking. This is something that in 50 years, we're going to look back and say, Nebraska did something extremely visionary that made a huge difference in the trajectory of our state. Between What we're talking about at Lake McConaughey, Knox County, and the effort in between Omaha and Lincoln, this is an opportunity to make a sizable, significant, long-lasting, and very effective investment. And I don't know that there's a lot of states that took this visionary approach as it related to the ARPA funding, as it relates to general funding. This was a committee of 10 senators. 1/5 of the Nebraska legislature participated. We visited all these places. We held public hearings. We got public input. We sought public input. HDR is the contractor that assisted the legislature. And so the work product that you see here is not some rim shot political deal that was cobbled together for the purpose of finding a way to spend money. It's backed up by the engineers and the professionals and the consultants, the public, state senators that gave a lot of time over the summer to go to places like Niobrara, Crofton, Lake Wygon, Marina, Ogallala. We took, and I think Senator Clements will remember, we took a bus ride around Lake McConaughey in a pouring rainstorm. We got the best tour you could get without seeing anything out the windows because it was raining like you wouldn't believe. 6 inches of rain came down on us during our tour. But what we learned going around Lake McConaughey is that that is an absolute jewel. We learned about the interplay between that and central public power and irrigation. This is a brilliant opportunity for us to grow the state. I want to again thank Speaker Hilgers and Senator McDonald for their vision and for all the members of the committee and for the executive branch and their interplay here. We have something to be very proud of. I urge you to adopt the committee amendment and the underlying bill. This will make a difference. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Senator Gregor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too stand in strong support of LB 1023 and Amendment 914 Natural Resources. First of all, I too want to thank the members of the Star Wars Committee. There was a lot of time put in over the summer traveling, had an opportunity to travel throughout the state and see some awful good things. This is an opportunity of a lifetime for Nebraskans. It is a time for economic development and job creation throughout Nebraska. I had the opportunity to be part of the Star Wars Committee and watch the process work. It was impressive to see how the consultant hired brought the local people into all the decision-making process. I was able to personally travel to all the areas the state included in LB 1023. However, because I represent the areas specifically in Northeast Nebraska, Knox County, I will concentrate on the portion of that LB 1023. I have lived in Knox County the majority of my life and have raised my children there and now have grandchildren being raised there. I know the beauty that Knox County has to offer, and LB 1023 provides us the opportunity to improve and showcase this beauty. We, Nebraska, are always compared to our friends to the north, South Dakota, and what they have to offer and how they do things. Well, LB 1023 will enable us to build and showcase the beauty Nebraska has to offer, especially in Northeast Nebraska. It enables us to build a destination place for tourists to flock to. I have literally traveled the entire world and have seen sunrises and sunsets in all parts of the world, and none better than the sunrises and sunsets that I have experienced in Northeast Nebraska. The improvements proposed in LB 1023 will not only create economic development, flood control, water access, but probably the most important thing it will do is bring tourists to our state, benefiting all Nebraskans. Some of the improvements which have been covered, but I'd like to reiterate in Northeast Nebraska, starting at Wygon area on Lewis and Clark Lake, is the enhancement of the marina from approximately 120 to 700 slips. What this will do is keep Nebraskans in Nebraska. It'll enhance our area for a lot more people to be able to use the Wygon area. And then moving to the west, the town of Niobrara that was mentioned, the village of Niobrara and the improvements they proposed, the improvements in the Niobrara State Park with the enhancement of the event center and the approximately 40-room lodge. Also the involvement with the Ponca tribe and the powwow area up in northeast Nebraska, and the water access facility that the people of Niobrara wanted so badly. All this will enhance the area. It'll make it a destination place for a lot of people to visit. And not only that, it will also synergize the area and bring the people together and work for a common cause. And in the final event, this will all help not only Northeast Nebraska, but the state of Nebraska as a whole. So I guess with all that LB 1023 has to offer, the great deal it has to offer, I ask your support to move LB 1023 to select. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Gregor. Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of Amendment 1914 and LB 1023. I want to thank everyone that I served with on the Star Wars Committee and their dedication and their interest in these potential projects. But also, I really want to thank HDR, John Engel, who led our his team from HDR that set up the meetings with us to be able to sit with the people around the state of Nebraska from the three areas that we've discussed today. These people came to us with their ideas and their concerns and their criticisms, and we did listen. And the reason we listened, because they were the subject matter experts. They were from those areas, and we were just asking, how do we help improve the area of Keith and Knox County with McConaughey and Lewis and Clark Lake and the Niobrara, which, as a person that grew up in South Omaha and didn't do a lot of traveling throughout the state, but sometimes we don't appreciate what's in our own backyard. And when you go to different parts of the state, as I did with the Star Wars Committee, you really do see true beauty that we don't appreciate. And we should celebrate and make sure that we're taking a kind of a bow on this one and patting ourselves on the back of what a beautiful state we have. And that's something that I did learn during this committee process. And again, it's a process. And with what we're trying to do and make the improvements at Niobrara and McConaughey, that's not what we're doing with the discussion of possibly a reservoir. The idea is that we're talking about, can there be a reservoir? Can we take the next step to have a reservoir that would positively impact our state? Now, remember, the first discussions on this public discussion was 1896. That was the first time they had a discussion about a reservoir near Ashland. In 1969, you had Governor Tiemann that is working on a plan to create a 880 corridor and a body of water that would be the largest body of water between Lake Michigan and the Great Salt Lakes with a international airport. When Governor Nixon came in 1971, he decided to go a different direction. This discussion's been going on. I know a number of senators since have brought a idea of what this could look like and their ideas. What we did was, going back, we met with the people of Ashland, and we told them and gave them our word that we were not going to do anything that was going to harm their community. We really were approaching it as, how do we protect life and property? How do we mitigate flooding? How do we make sure that we have a quality water? And of course, the third was recreation. But we didn't want to do it in a way where other people had approached possibly communities and said, turn on your faucets and get out. That was not our approach at all. Our approach was, we wanted to listen to you. We wanted to look at the areas and bring in some subject matter experts like HDR with their team to say what's possible. And today what we're discussing is what's possible for possibly a reservoir along 80. But we definitely are talking about what we can do, and what's going on in McConaughey and Niobrara is projects that we can move forward to enhance our state and hopefully help retain and recruit people in the future. I will yield the remainder of my time to Speaker Hildreth.
Thanks, Senator McDonald. Speaker Hildreth, 1 minute 10.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator McDonald. I do want to, it's probably not enough time to get into some of the counter arguments or questions really I wouldn't even characterize some of these as counter arguments, really questions about how this would develop, how this would be implemented. And I think some of that I'm going to talk about on my next time on the mic. But I do want to just point out, as we talk about sort of the sea change in thinking and working through opposition, so Senator Clements and Senator Bossman in particular were adamantly opposed to this when we first started our process with LB 406, with the green copy of that particular bill. And for good reason. They represent areas that would be impacted if we decided, for instance, to dam the Platte and try to do something like flood the city of Ashland. And I got to give both of those senators incredible credit, because what they did is we sat down together in my office, worked with Senator McDonald, walked through every one of their concerns to make sure that this process went the right direction and that it would never got off the train tracks. And ultimately, by working with Senator Bossman and Senator Clements, we were able to get a far better product. We were able to avoid the economic impact and community impact that they were concerned about, while also getting some additional flood control benefits and getting that win-win-win that we're talking about. So we wouldn't be here today without those two senators being willing.
This time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I also was a member of the Star Wars Committee, and I want to thank Speaker Hilgers for his leadership in this endeavor. It's quite an eye-opening experience. I got on because Lake McConaughey is in my backyard, and I've seen the lack of development for that opportunity. It is the first or second largest tourist destination in the state of Nebraska on an annual basis, but it could be so much more. It needs additional funds to help fully develop that recreation area. I'd never been to the Niobrara area, Lewis and Clark Lake, and I will give a shout out to Senator Flood and Senator Gregert for the local individuals who turned out to welcome our committee and really showcase what they have, but also to point out what they need in order to make that a destination in Nebraska for tourists and local residents as well. The Platte project, the Platte Lake, it's very interesting when we move into this project, because we're looking at an area that is highly developed, unlike the other two areas, but where can you find space to put a large lake, and what are the obstacles? And that's part of the reason why we got $2 million last year in order to hire HDR to help us answer those questions. You know, the fact that we are looking at a lake in the floodplain, you know, is that feasible? You know, those are questions that need to be answered before we move forward. I guess this bill is the first step in a very long process, as Senator McDonald had mentioned. And I still go back to Lake McConaughey, back in the 20s and 30s when that was being built. You know, I've got a book on my desk that I'm reading about the history of Lake McConaughey and the individuals who worked for decades trying to make that vision come to life. And it took a long time, and it took a lot of money and a lot of vision and a lot of tireless effort. That's what we're doing here. There's a vision out there. You know, will it come to pass? I don't know, but it's not going to if we don't try. If we don't start down this path, there's going to be obstacles. There's no question about that. And there's going to be a lot of money. And I haven't found the figures yet of what it costs to build Kingsley Dam and Lake McConaughey, but 50 years later, it's cheap. It's really cheap. And those are the things that we kind of need to keep in mind, not keep looking for ways to derail these investments. We're in a very fortunate time in the state. We've got some dollars to work with. There's a huge amount of private sector money out there that's looking for a home, that wants to develop things. I've had additional tours around Lake McConaughey. There's a subdivision that is laid out there, and a golf course, and power and water's there. and it's been sitting there since 2001. There's still a couple of little obstacles
1 minute.
that need to be overcome in order to make that subdivision and an 18-hole golf course that would rival any in the state to come to fruition. There's a lot of people want to work and develop areas of the state of Nebraska, and we have natural resources that we just need to take the blinders off and work to overcome those obstacles. You know, we could have a tremendous boost in our economy through tourism if we continue down this path. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Hughes. Senator Blood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I want you to know before I start that I spoke to Senator Hilgers about this, and he asked that I do it on his bill. So I hate to break up this love fest, this well-organized love fest. I'm in favor of the amendment, but I'm going to listen to the debate on the underlying bill. And the reason I was allowed to stand and speak is because he had asked that I do this instead of a point of personal privilege. So with that said, many of you are going to be pulled out of the body today, out into the rotunda, and speak to a lot of young people in reference to suicide. And I hope that you do take the time to do that. We heard a very impassioned presentation from Senator Hunt yesterday in reference to a recent suicide here in Lincoln, Nebraska. But what I want to talk about today is about our healthcare workers, because we just had Healthcare Workers Week that ended, I believe, on March 4th. And I just want to bring something in the forefront, and I want to have this historically in our record. And the reason I'm saying this is because we have politicized our healthcare professionals. People running for office, people that are elected officials. We've taken a noble profession and made a circus out of it. And I want you guys to know that even before the pandemic began, that the suicide risk was as high among female nurses, higher among female nurses compared with American women as a whole. And a lot of people don't seem to know that. Female nurses were found to be roughly 70% more likely to die by suicide than female doctors. More than 159,000 suicides occurred during a recent study time frame. Of those, nearly 2,400 involved nurses, roughly 8 in 10 of who are women. That correlates with estimates indicating that 80 to 85% of nurses are women. So just over 850 suicides were cited among doctors, of which about 85% were men. The remainder, 156,000 suicides, were among the general public. 3/4 of those cases involved men. But the pandemic has added enormous strains to healthcare workers, especially nurses who provide the vast majority of the bedside care. 1 in 5 nurses have retired from active duty since the pandemic began. Nurses experience suicidal ideation in greater numbers than other general workers, with 5.5% reporting suicidal ideation within the past year. Nurses, more than any other segment of the healthcare workforce, have died during the pandemic. 1,140 nursing professionals in the first year. I want to remind you, when the pandemic started, how many healthcare professionals weren't even able to go to their own homes. They couldn't kiss their loved ones, hug their loved ones. They couldn't even sleep in their own beds. When the pandemic first started, people were baking cookies and bringing bottled water and banging on their pans and making noise. And then it became political. And then we forgot the sacrifices that our healthcare workers were making. And so even though there's a lot of noise over here and nobody seems to be listening, I want to say that as you talk to these people about suicide, I want you to know that we tend to ignore. Can I have the gavel, please? Thank you. We tend to ignore these silent few that mean so much to Nebraskans. If you're worried about a teacher shortage, you ought to worry about their mental health. If you're worried about a doctor shortage, you ought to worry about their mental health, because it's been a crap fest the last 2 years. And we don't seem to identify that they need our help or be doing anything about it. And so with that, again, I'm sorry to kill the love fest. I know you guys are going to pick right back up where you left off. With that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Blood. Senator Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 1914 and the underlying bill. I was a member of the Star Wars Committee and appreciate working with so many colleagues that are thinking big and for the future of Nebraska. I did want to speak on one issue before I yield my time to the Speaker. The Appropriations Committee, first of all, I'll back up and say that Speaker Hilders and I have been working with the City of Lincoln and meeting with them to ensure that whatever project is built in terms of a lake in the area between Lincoln and Omaha, that it will not impact Lincoln's current or future water. And so our Appropriations Committee, we did place $1 million in our initial recommendation that you'll see before you in the budget when the budget comes up for debate. And this appropriation, it's part of the $200 million that we are appropriating for the Star Wars Task Force projects. The $1 million goes to an independent study to make sure that the Lincoln and Omaha water resources are not impacted negatively by the large lake project. And again, the Speaker and I have worked on this. I feel confident that a study of the magnitude that would come from a $1 million investment will ensure Lincolnites and Omaha residents and MUD that this lake will not impact, and perhaps in the future may benefit Lincoln and our water needs. With that, I'll yield my time to the Speaker.
Thanks, Senator Wishart. Speaker Hilders, 3 minutes 15.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Wishart, and I thank you for all of your work on this project. The Star Wars Committee worked incredibly well together, and Senator Wishart has always been an amazing advocate for the city of Lincoln, city we both represent, and we've had a number of conversations with her and as well as the city on the potential impact on the water supply. And Senator Wishart and I both share the significant concern for the city, for the city's water supply, and ensuring that this project would in no way have any negative impact on the city of Lincoln. And to that regard, Senator Wishart and I have talked about the idea that Lincoln needs a second source. As you know, in Lincoln, we have a single source water. It comes from the Platte. And in order to continue our growth as a city, we need a second source. And so I support the efforts to go find a second source. And Senator Wishart and I have talked about asking the Appropriations Committee to add $20 million of ARPA funds in order to fund the beginning of that second source development to the Missouri River. It's a request that I fully support and will advocate for the Appropriations Committee on the floor of the legislature. As we have done within this project, a couple things I want to point out, and I'm really grateful that Senator Wishart raised this. Number one, we did an initial analysis that I mentioned, and the initial analysis would, again, preliminary, it's not final, is that there would be an incremental positive benefit on the water supply in Lincoln. And the reason is during the low months, I'm not a hydrologist, but this is my understanding, during the dry months in the summer, having this reservoir near the Platte would actually help refill some of the lower flows in the Platte and help the city of Lincoln make sure that we don't go too dry in the summer. For those of you who lived in Lincoln, like I did in 2012 during the drought, that actually can be a meaningful difference. We're certainly not arguing at this point that the development of a lake would change the game just by virtue of creating the lake for the city of Lincoln, but we think that it's going to have a slight positive impact. Beyond that, though, what I'm excited about is the opportunity, and I've had some initial conversations about what this phase one might look like with the public-private partnership, where the development of a lake could actually catalyze additional development for that water infrastructure that would help us develop a regional water supply for both Lincoln, thank you, Mr. President, for Lincoln and other communities in the area. And so that's actually kind of an exciting way to look at it. And we think that there's at least a potential path to some transformative, game-changing opportunities from a water supply perspective. I would also, again, underline, I mentioned in my opening, but I think it's worth highlighting over and over and over again, talking to the city of Lincoln and MUD, who MUD also has significant concern about the Platte. that we have asked the Appropriations Committee to appropriate specific funds. I think it's $1 million to do the hydrology study, to do the necessary work to see whether or not this can go forward. And as I mentioned in my opening, if we do that work and ultimately we determine that it will have a negative impact, this project won't go forward. But then we will know that this is the project that is taken off the table, and we can move on down other paths to find other transformative changes and opportunities for the state of Nebraska. So water is at the forefront of our list of concerns, and we've got a really good path in front of us, I think, to do the right study and also potentially help Lincoln develop that second source of water. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before proceeding, Senator McCollum would like to recognize the Nebraska chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. These are folks from all across the state of Nebraska. They're with us in the North Balcony. Could those guests please rise? We can welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Continuing discussion, Senator John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I rise. I guess at this point, I'm not going to vote for this. I guess I don't know if I'm going to be present not voting or a no at this point. As Speaker Hilgers pointed out, I submitted some comments and concerns about AM 1914, and there is an amendment being worked on that's going to be brought at select. And so at this point, I'm going to reserve judgment until I see those changes and those amendments. But I just wanted to rise and, for the record, point out the concerns that jumped out to me when I initially read AM 1914. And so first off, a lot of people, I sit on the Natural Resources Committee, and I heard the initial testimony for the Star Wars Committee and the testimony from the folks at Lake McConaughey and the folks in Knox County, and was duly impressed about the programs they have there, the services, and the need. And so those are the parts I don't particularly have a concern as to those. And I would suggest, I don't know if anybody's gotten this or if the speaker has distributed this, but there is a very nice special committee of the legislature statewide tourism, recreation, water, access, and resource sustainability preferred initiative overview. That is a nice color breakdown, kind of a description of what all the projects are in pictures. But my concern and the concerns that I expressed to Speaker Hilgers, and I do appreciate his willingness to work with me in addressing those concerns. And like I said, I'm reserving my ultimate vote until I see how those concerns are addressed. But I'll just kind of start walking through them. And I know there's a lot of folks who are going to talk on this, but I'll push my light again when I run out of time. So on page, well, it started on page 3 of AM 1914, and it's about line 10, section 13. It's in the public interest and for the purposes act of the state. Manage the construction development of a lake in a manner that encourages private donations and investment, including through the use of public-private partnership. B, maintain sufficient oversight to protect the state's investment in the lake. And C, retain ownership of the lake as an asset of the state of Nebraska. So there's some good things laid out in there, and we've talked about this. Speaker Hilgers and I have talked, and I've talked with others about the concern that people have that we'll build this lake through a public-private partnership, and that the charge of that public-private partnership is to manage it in a manner that encourages private donations and investment. And so the concern there is that it doesn't provide for permanent public access. And I think that if we're going to make this type of investment, and people can disagree about whether they want to make this investment or not, but if we're going to make it as a state asset and talk about it as this great opportunity, we need to ensure and enshrine in statute the fact that at least a portion of this needs to remain accessible to the public at all times. Because even though it is owned as an ownership asset of the state of Nebraska, there's still a possibility that access would be cut off to the greater public. And so I think that there's an opportunity and a requirement that we make that language stronger in the statute. I would like to see, and I think it would be in our best interest to establish a state park as part of the lake. I've spoken with Game and Parks, and I know others have as well, that Game and Parks is not interested, and I don't think necessarily equipped to manage and maintain the whole lake and be responsible for the maintenance of this type of lake. However, I think that they would be interested and capable of managing a park that includes the trails that maybe would exist around the lake, a beach, campgrounds, and those sorts of things that are exactly what everybody envisions. If you do look at this handout, you can see that there are
1 minute
contemplated in the design, those sorts of things. But we can't let ourselves get caught up. This is an exciting project. Everyone's talked about how great it is. It is exciting. There is great possibility here. There is but we can't let ourselves get carried away by the excitement and look past the important details that ensure that this actually accomplishes the thing that we're talking about. We have to make sure that this statute puts in the protections for the citizens of Nebraska to, if we do build this lake, this amenity, this resource, that we actually make it available and protected for the citizens of Nebraska at all times, and not get carried away and say this is an economic development tool and the best way to serve that would be to close it as a private lake owned by the state of Nebraska. So I'll push my light again. I'll talk probably this afternoon by the looks of the list, but I have other concerns that I'd like to raise, and that I think that Senator Hilgers and I have begun speaking about integrating into the future amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Urban.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I look at the list on the queue up there. It looks like we're going to go till after dinner loving this bill, or whatever you want to call it. But I have a few questions about this. First of all, and I said this to somebody this morning, I'd like to divide the question. And that's a joke, but I'd like to separate it. I think there's three issues here. It very well could be that what Senator Gregert wants to do up in Niobrara could have value, and it probably is something we need to do. And what they're trying to accomplish at McConaughey may also have value. But I'll just say this, I don't think anybody in this room except maybe Senator McKinney and Wishart will be alive long enough to ever see a lake built by Ashland. And the other day in the Appropriations Committee, we said something about we'll all be dead before we do a certain thing. And Senator Wishart interrupted and she said, not all of us. And so that's why I threw that in there. But getting the permits to build a lake is difficult. And where in the world will you put sediment, dirt, gravel from 4,000 acres, 30 feet deep? And how long will that take? Now, Senator Bosselman has some issues with flooding, and I think those are issues we need to deal with. But as far as building a lake, a 3,900 acre, 4,000 acre lake by Ashland, people say we should think big. That is really big. But reality is, the majority of us will never see that. And I think someone said 50 years from now, they'll look back. I think Senator Flood said 50 years are going to look back, and they said the legislature was really forward thinking. That may be the day when they start to implement the new lake. So if I had my way, I would say we vote for the improvements at McConaughey and at the Niobrara, and we do a little more research to see if we can get the permitting to build a dam by Ashland, a lake. So I wasn't on the committee. Every one of those committee members signed up for that committee, and they took the necessary time to travel the state to look at those facilities. And I can appreciate that. But the point is, they volunteered for it. Okay? And so we thank all these people for spending all their time this summer doing that. And maybe it's rightfully so, but remember, you signed up for it. We signed up to be senators, and so whatever we do here, we knew that was part of the situation. And so I'm not sure exactly why we want to build a marina at McConaughey. That may be of value. But I think the issue that we'll have to deal with at McConaughey may be something that the legislature has no control over, is some of these things that they want to do there will need to get approval from Central. And I'm not so sure that we'll be able to get that permission as easily as we think it will be. So we'll have to see. And so as we go forward with all of these projects, and I see they have $1.1 million for a sign.
1 minute.
A sign at McConaughey. $1.1 million for a sign. That's got to be some kind of sign. And this isn't Star Wars. This Star Wars project is not ARPA money. This is rainy day fund, okay? 200 million. So I'm not sure that I'm going to vote for this if it continues to have the lake included, but we'll see how the discussion goes, because I'm sure we're going to have a lot of discussion because there's 15 more people in the queue. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Clements.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was on the Star Wars committee this summer and enjoyed the information. We went first out to the Lake McConaughey area, had a hearing there, and water access is a problem on that lake. I share Senator Erdman's concern about the marina. They do need water access, but when we were there, they said the lake was 22 feet below normal. It was July or late July, I think. And how to get a marina that can handle that kind of a variation in water is a question to me that I think the bill does talk about marina in there, but I was hoping maybe we could use water access. If there's just a longer boat ramp, maybe that would work. We'll wait and see how the engineers come up with that. Then the Niobrara areas, I had not been to the Niobrara State Park and the Lewis and Clark Lake, this beautiful area up there. Those two areas, west and northeast, I support the funding for improvements for tourism. And I think that's good for the economic development of both of those areas. Then next thing I wanted to talk about was the reservoir, the potential reservoir on the Lower Platte, which is next to my district. And my wife happened to be at a ladies group yesterday near Ashland, and one of the members of the group said, Ashland's going to be flooded by a new lake. And she came home and told me that. And that's why I'm on this committee, and that's why Senator Bostom and I got involved. And I went to read what we got put into this bill, and the amendment, page 2, line 24 says, a reservoir could be built without a dam of the Platte River Channel and without negatively impacting the city of Ashland, the surrounding communities, or the economic development already occurring in such area. I just want to assure the people of Ashland that there's not going to be a dam on the Platte River, and we're not going to harm the Ashland area. Then another thing about that project is the Lincoln and Omaha water supply. They get a lot of water, almost all their water from Lincoln comes from that area, and Omaha gets quite a bit of their water too, and I support protection of their water supply. And as part of the study, that will need to be ensured. The most important part about the Lower Platte portion of the bill is the flood control and mitigation, in my opinion. In my district, I have almost 30 miles of the Platte River. In 2019, there was many homes flooded along the Platte River. And we toured in Saunders County. The NRD there has what's been called shovel-ready projects of some flood control for tributaries that come down into the Platte River. And that's very important to fund those. And the city of Schuyler also in 2019, the flooding on the Platte River there eroded some of the Platte River bank, and there's some riverbank stabilization that's very important to be done to protect that city.
1 minute.
Thank you. Then the reservoir along the lower Platte, I'm okay with funding the research and studying, looking at the engineering, but the lake construction, I want to wait till we for sure know it's possible to do and that it's not going to be causing more damage than necessary. Especially, there are a lot of landowners that own land where they're thinking about proposing a reservoir, and those landowners' rights need to be respected, in my opinion. And so I do support AM 1914, and I thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Clements. Senator DeBoer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if Speaker Hilgers would yield to some questions.
Speaker Hilgers, yield, please.
Absolutely.
When you talked earlier on the mic about the public-private partnership, I was curious if that would have any effect on the public's access to or use of the lake.
Thank you.
And I'll just yield you the rest of my time to answer that question.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. I really appreciate the question. It's maybe the most common question I get, which is, are we just gonna, is the proposal here to try to build a lake or a reservoir that will just only benefit a certain subset of Nebraskans? And then the second part of that question is, if the answer is no to the first question, in other words, we want to have public access, how do we ensure that to be the case? What can we point to, either in the statutory language or otherwise, that would give us confidence that what you say is going to be true? And so to answer the first question, the public-private partnership is intended to get some additional private dollars, significant private dollars to build a lake, but only if we can ensure it's a state asset and ensure significant public access to the lake. How are we going to do that? Well, first, in the statutory language itself, in the green copy of the bill, we explicitly said that the state will retain ownership of the lake as an asset for all Nebraskans. And so if the state retains ownership, who manages that, whether it's Game and Parks or otherwise, as a starting point, that implies in the green copy that, hey, this is a state asset. It's not meant for just a select few. Senator John Kavanaugh raised the same question you did, Senator DeBoer, and said, look, can we have a little bit more? Can we be a little stronger on that language to make sure not just that it's a state asset, but really make sure, belt and suspenders, that public access is ensured for whatever lake might be built? And so in the select copy of the amendment that we're working on for select file, which I've got a draft of, which you and I dialogued about off the mic, make sure that whatever gets built retains public access to the entire lake. I think that's a critical component to what we are trying to accomplish. If you think about Lewis and Clark Lake has private development, but it has public access. The marina is Wygan Marina was built and is managed by Game and Parks. If you think about Lake McConaughey, there is outstanding private development on Lake McConaughey, but it has public access and full public use and enjoyment of the lake. That's the model that we're trying to replicate here. I would also point out a separate in the select file amendment that we will bring to the floor is to include within the sort of the overall the sort of team that's looking at the public-private partnership, which includes the Department of Natural Resources. And in addition to that, we want to include Game and Parks. Game and Parks has indicated to us, hey, look, if you give us a 4,000-acre lake, size of Lake Okoboji, 7 miles long, a mile wide, that's probably more than we want to handle, but we want to be involved and we want to be good partners. And I think Nebraskans have a lot of confidence that Game and Parks would ensure state public access to our state resources, state assets. So we are in the select file amendment that we're working on. It would include additional language to make sure that Game and Parks is an ex officio member of this group. And so Game and Parks will have a seat at the table. Just by the way, will the city of Lincoln and others. So I think there's very strong language in the statute, in the bill itself. We will add some additional language to double down on that. Certainly there's a record we're making here today. And at the end of the day, if there's any taxpayers' dollars put into this project, which is what we're proposing, It has to be, and it's non-negotiable, it has to be ultimately a state asset that provides the benefit to all Nebraskans, not just a select few. And so I appreciate the question, Senator DeBoer. I know I'm next in the queue, Mr. President. How much time do I?
1 minute.
1 minute? And then may I continue through?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other, well, let me talk through some other questions that I've received. And Senator DeBoer, if there's additional information I give on that question, I'm happy to do so. I think it's a critical question to ask and answer through this process. I do want to talk a little bit about the economic impact of this particular project, because we did do some preliminary analysis, as I mentioned, on hydrology and the impact of the city of Lincoln water supply. We also did an economic impact study during the Star Wars process. And in some ways, I think the number I'm going to give you undershoots significantly the positive impact of the different projects that we are proposing, in part because it doesn't take into account the quality of life, the things that are not measurable. How do you put a price or a value on a family coming to Lake McConaughey to be able to spend the day together, or a family having a reunion at Lewis and Clark Lake, or enjoying the day on the water? You can't put a dollar on the value of that. And so any economic impact analysis is not going to include those types of things. It also didn't include the kind of follow-on investment that we think will happen. So as an example, a very small example of what we think this might catalyze is in Keith County. When we had our hearing on 1023, representatives of Keith County, who've been great teammates throughout this entire process, came and said, hey, just by announcing Star Wars, we hadn't committed to anything. We hadn't even committed to a proposal. The legislature had said, hey, we're going to study what we can do to help Lake McConaughey and the surrounding region. Just that announcement catalyzed additional investment and investment opportunities in Lake McConaughey. So whatever number we come up with is going to undershoot, I think, the long-term positive impact, economic and otherwise, of these different proposals that we have. Having said all that, it's a very long windup. I'm burying the punchline, but our economic analysis said that this will have a $5 billion plus economic impact to the state of Nebraska, and an ongoing yearly impact in the 9 figures. So just from a cost benefit, and I think there's so much more beyond just cost benefit, just in the dollars and cents terms, just that cost benefit suggests that it would be well into the 10 figures. And I think that's pretty exciting as we're thinking about catalyzing economic growth, attracting and retaining people here in our state. I will tell you, as an aside, one of a major employers in Lincoln, I won't name them, emailed me just the other day and said, hey, our ambition is to have the largest Nebraska-based workforce in the entire state within the next 10 years. And this type of a project is exactly what we need to help attract and retain young talent here in the state. Let me talk, with a few minutes that I've got left on my time on the mic, a couple other questions. We talked a little bit about the impact on the water supply. I dialogued with Senator Wishart about that. I've spoken to several about the public access question. Senator John Kavanaugh raised that. Senator DeBoer raised that. I think there are some very clear answers to that. There has been some questions about, well, what about the landowners? And I think this is really important to talk about. We've approached this from the beginning in a win-win-win, non-zero-sum way. And we've had some initial conversations with some of the landowners. I want to be clear, a final site hasn't been selected. That's part of this phase 1 process. But we've had these initial conversations, and we want to make it a win, any type of land acquisition, a win for those landowners. You hear these stories. We heard a few at the committee hearing where eminent domain is used, and people don't get fair market value for their land, and they have land that's been in their family for decades or generations taken away from them involuntarily. And those are not the stories that you ever want to hear, and that's not the approach that we intend to take. We want to have arm's length land acquisitions that are win-win-wins for the landowners as well. And they're going to have a seat at the table if phase 1 goes forward. And ultimately, if we can't acquire the land, then that would be another reason why we could never get to phase 2. But that's something that is really important. We want everyone in the state to be excited about not just the outcome, but the means to achieve that outcome. Outside of that, I'm happy to dialogue if there are any other questions off the mic or otherwise. The model we're trying to follow is what we've seen in Lake McConaughey or Lewis and Clark or other natural resource attractions. And we think doing it here at this moment, this is really the moment in time for us to do this, because with the continued economic growth and the way that the Lincoln, Ashland from the west and Omaha from the east are growing, this is really the moment in time for us to see if we can do this. If we can't do it, then we'll kind of know we can take this off the table. But if we think we can, we shouldn't wait 10 years, because in 10 years, there's just going to be some additional economic growth. It's going to be more, thank you, Mr. President. It's going to be more difficult to try to do something what we're trying to do, which is put a Lake Okoboji sized lake between those two communities. In 10 years, I think the opportunity will be lost. In 5 years, the opportunity might be lost. As Senator Hughes said, we'll know one way or the other if we do phase one, whether we can do this. But if we don't do it, we might as well just take it off the table for our lifetime. And I think that's such a transformative opportunity that I don't think we should do that. I think we should pursue this as far as we can. And hopefully, unlike my good friend, Senator Steve Erdman, I think this is very possible, very doable, and we can achieve it. And we ought to take this first step to do so. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before proceeding, Senator Hilkeman has some very special guests with us today up in the north balcony, his wife, Julie, and 5 grandchildren from Waco, Texas, Nate, Isaiah, McKenna, Naomi, and Timothy. If those guests could please rise, I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Continuing discussion, Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I think this is one of these bills that I think we need to spend a lot of time with. I have a lot of questions, and I'm going to lay them out in my 5 minutes that I have, and then I'll be back on the mic, and somebody can either address them in the middle, or I'll be asking questions as we move along. But one of the big things that I look at is, you know, we've got Lake McConaughey, we've got Harlan County Reservoir. We've got numerous nice lakes, Calamus, around the state. And when you watch what's happened, like, let's take McConaughey, a huge lake, you could call it one of our treasures. And we have not developed those resources there over, I don't know how many, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, how long that has been in place, probably closer to 100. And we still haven't, I think, developed that lake. And if you go around there, you can look at what we talk about economic development. It just doesn't happen. Maybe it's located in the wrong spot, I guess. It needs to be located between Lincoln and Omaha. When I look at Harlan County Reservoir, look at the communities around there. There's no excitement happening there. You go there to fish. Even the bait store isn't making that much money. Yes, we want areas for recreation. And yes, I would like them in central Nebraska so I didn't have to drive a couple hours to go there. But when I look at what we're trying to do here and the process we're using to get it done, I have a lot of questions. And I wonder why, for instance, that the DNR would be in control of this lake rather than Game and Parks. The DNR has never, my knowledge, built a lake or managed it. They're managing our water, but they do not develop things. And so Game and Parks has developed lakes. They've helped to develop McConaughey, what's there. And so to turn it over to a different organization for development, that to me already spells you're looking at the politics that's going to enter into the development of this lake. And when I look further at the nonprofit that's going to be established and who gets appointed to that and what role they play in that, and I know NRDs will be allowed to join in. And so now you've got some taxing authority and some condemnation authority that you can take ground with, and a property tax increase for others in the NRD. When we talked a lot, you read the bill and numerous times it mentions flood control. And when I've looked at lakes that have been built, and I'll use examples like around Central City, there's numerous sand pits have been built there. And there's huge developments going around there, and there's lots just around one of those sand pits that sells for $100,000 or more. So this isn't going to be cheap residential housing development going up around this lake. These properties are not going to be allowed to be annexed. So they'll not be a part of a city. But again, the Department of Natural Resources then will manage these homes, or will they be an SID? Will they own their land? Are they going to lease it? Who's going to put in the streets, the sewer, and the water? I see the potential there. I see the need that, yes, there's people would probably pay $200,000 for a lot to be on a lake that size. But to say that they can't be annexed, they're not going to be part of a city, they're going to be managed by the DNR, and it mentions a nonprofit in here, and I still haven't figured out quite what their role is, but they're allowed to make a lot of decisions. They're allowed to take land adjacent to the lake. How far out are they going to go? You're going to go out 4 or 5 miles? I wouldn't mind living a half mile from a lake. I just think needs to be a little bit more details before I'm willing to put money into a project like this, because we have a lot of other needs, and some of them were addressed earlier, but I'll be bringing some of those up later. But again, I look at this and it brings to mind many questions.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Friesen. Senator Ben Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I just want to share a couple of my thoughts about LB 1023. I do appreciate all the work Senator Hilders and the Star Wars Committee has put into this. They are 10 very smart and capable senators who do have a vision for the state of Nebraska, and I always appreciate their thoughts, as well as other senators such as Senator Friesen with his unique perspective on the other side of some of the maybe unintended consequences that some of this can have. And I think that's the best way that we can work a big idea and a big bill like this out to make sure that we do the best for the people of Nebraska. I also want to echo a little bit of what my colleague Senator Flood said earlier about the Star Wars Committee and their appropriateness of making sure that they listen to public comments, they listen to input from the public, because I think that is crucial with a project such as this. As much as us as senators have ideas on what we want this project to look like and some of our thoughts, I think it's more important that we listen to the people of Nebraska with something like this. I think one of the times I last checked when I talked with, when I looked at a recent poll about states and their tourism, I'm pretty sure Nebraska didn't rank very high in the states that people are most likely to visit when it comes to tourism. I believe we were one of the last ones. And I'm not saying it's a lack of us trying, but I think it sometimes is a lack of resources or places to visit, interesting ideas that we lack. And I'm hoping that something like this will help fill that void. I think South Dakota has done a very good job over the decades and years about building their tourism when it comes to whether it's Mount Rushmore or there's other kinds of big ideas and projects that they have, whether it's their hunting, whether it's their natural resources such as their fishing. I think they've done a great job of advertising that, of building that. And so I'm hoping this is the direction that we're taking, because that's kind of a big interest of mine, the future of Nebraska. And so another thing that I like about this bill is the reciprocating effect that it can have for the state of Nebraska. It's not that we're just making a lake that'll be fun to visit, but what some of my other colleagues have mentioned, and Senator Hilders, is the amount of revenue, and I'm saying that's usually not why we vote for bills, but the amount of revenue that this can have for the state of Nebraska, not just as a state, but as the local effect that can have in sales tax, and for commercial property. That's one of the reasons why I like this bill. And one of the things I just want to make sure that we're conscious of, and I'm pretty sure that we are because we've mentioned it a few times, is not just the public comments and the input, is to make sure that we're also conscious of the landowners who will be impacted by this. I know Senator Hilgers, Speaker Hilgers just mentioned this a little bit ago. And my concern for the use of eminent domain, I want to make sure that we're conscious of that. And something one of my colleagues said, Senator Kavanaugh, was making sure that we do make this accessible to the people. And it's not just a giant commercial property that's already picked out for certain people and businesses, but that we do make this as accessible as we can for the people of Nebraska. That's an important fact that we have to make sure that we kind of keep in mind with something like this. Sometimes this kind of gets lost when we start talking about numbers and revenue, land acquisition, is making sure that we always think of the people of Nebraska first when it comes to something like this, because they are the ones who are going to use this. They're the ones who are going to build this, which will then hopefully in the future allow us to do more projects such as this. We have to prove to the people of Nebraska that we can do this efficiently and effectively and with the taxpayer dollars in mind. If we do it right this time, which I really believe that's happening so far, we're off to a good start. We do it right this time, this might give us the opportunity to kind of look at doing some other things in the future. So I appreciate everyone's input. I'm listening. And so far, I am a yes on AM 1914 and a yes on LB 1023. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Lathrop.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, good morning. I want to thank the committee that worked on this topic for 9 months. I appreciate devoting time during the interim to a project like this, the amount of time it takes up. In fact, I've been involved in a lot of them myself, including in the last year, and we'll have a chance to talk about my efforts over the interim at a different time. I think that there's been a lot of, as I listened to the debate today, there's been a lot of sort of cheerleading, which is fine. It's an exciting project. And there's been a lot of dialogue that assumes that that's kind of where this project is at. And if you don't mind, I want to ask the speaker some questions just so that Joe Sixpack, who is wondering about this lake that might be come into existence as a result of this effort, understands what it's about. And so I'm going to ask some questions, and frankly, I don't know the answers to, or I'd stand up here and talk about it. So if the speaker doesn't mind.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So can I start with this question? How much is this bill and the appropriations? How much money are we talking about?
So if I may, Senator Lathrop, the bill doesn't have any specific appropriation in it. There is a $200 million request of the Appropriation Committee that's broken up several different ways, and I'm happy to unpack that if you'd like me to.
If you can do it briefly, but it's $200 million, let me ask this question, a different one. There are different projects around the state. I understand there's one in Niobrara and one, for example, at McConaughey and some other ones besides the lake. How much of the $200 million is going to those projects, and do they get done right away, or do they wait for more engineering studies and more things to happen?
It's north of $100 million for all those other projects, and there might be some design work that needs to be done depending on the project, but more or less, Senator Lathrop, those projects are ready to go. Only $20 million, by the way, is appropriated for the lake.
So if we're talking about $200 million and only $100 million is for other than lake, and we only have 10 for the lake, where's the rest of it going?
So it's about $20 million for the lake appropriated, about $40 million that is put in a cash reserve potentially for phase 2 if a future legislature wants to be able to appropriate that, and the remaining 140 goes to those other projects.
Do we have to do anything else other than pass this bill and the appropriations bill for the 140 to get spent in those other projects other than the lake to be a reality?
Other than the lake, I'm not aware of anything else that we would need to do other than those two things to get moving on those projects.
So we pass the bill, and the only thing left to do, we appropriate $10 million in a bill we'll see later on. And then other stuff has to be done, other work needs to be done to make the lake a reality.
For the lake, absolutely, yes.
Okay. Did the committee or any of the engineers involved in this process through the summer issue any kind of a report? Is there something the guy watching this on his television can look at and make reference to find out what did the Star Wars committee come up with? What did the engineers say?
The final report of the committee is going to be done this year, but there is a website, and I don't want to misstate it, but there's a website that has all of the information as well, the pictures, the proposal, all the information that was given to the media is on that website.
Okay, perhaps you can share that on some other opportunity when you, if you have it, then we'll let you share it so that the guy at home can watch and see what we're talking about.
1 minute.
So Senator Flood's just handed me a study, but I don't see a website on it. When you have an opportunity on one of your opportunities to speak, but we don't have a report from the committee yet.
What you have in front of you, what Senator Flood did was, whether you call it a report or not, it's a summary of our recommendations and proposals. I think the committee has to, under LB 406, issue a final report by the end of this calendar year.
End of this calendar year?
Correct.
Not 21?
22.
Okay.
For all intents and, I'm sorry, Senator.
When we talk about a public-private partnership, and I hear you say the state will own the lake, I assume we'll be responsible for maintaining it, digging it, and all of those kind of things. What's the private partnership piece of this? Are there going to be developers that will then own the land around the lake and be able to develop that for home lot sales or that sort of thing?
That's a great question, and that's really what.
That's time, Senators. Thank you, Senator Lathrop and Speaker Hilgers. Senator Flood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, members. I appreciate the dialogue that Senator Lathrop and Senator Hilgers are having on the project. I wanted to make a record when we talk about a public-private partnership, what that looks like in Knox County. Obviously, I am very drawn to this area of the state. I think Senator Gregert, who represents it, will tell you it's the most beautiful part of the state. I want to talk to you about what we've done in Knox County. In a few moments, you're going to be getting 3 color pictures of renderings. The first one is going to be an event center and hotel at what is called the Eagles View on the campus of Niobrara State Park. The way we envision this partnership, and I have several communications back and forth with officials at the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, is that the state of Nebraska, through the funding, would build the event center at this point overlooking Niobrara. Think of the amenities at Nebraska City with the Lead Lodge and what that has done for Otoe County and River Country right in there with Nemaha County, Johnson County, the draw that has been for tourism. The idea is that we would have this event center at Niobrara that would receive funding and be built on the campus of Niobrara State Park. And then the Game and Parks Commission would go out and work with a private partner. And right now, we're in serious discussions with they are in serious discussions, and we are, as a committee, with the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. The Ponca Tribe of Nebraska is very interested in this because they feel that everybody else has been telling their story, and they haven't been able to tell the story of Standing Bear, that they haven't been able to tell the story of their tribe and the Trail of Tears and the amazing stories about Standing Bear. And so what we have envisioned here in Niobrara is a partnership between a private entity such as the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, which would spend up to $18 million, the state of Nebraska, which would spend upwards to $30 million on the event center, and then on top of it, the Game and Parks Commission would be spending $667,459, and that would be for the Niobrara Event Center and Lodge. This unlocks this part of the state to people that can't afford to build a cabin. And what we are doing in Nebraska here is we are saying, do you want to experience the majesty of the confluence of these 2 rivers? Do you want to see the most beautiful sight in the state of Nebraska? You don't have to own $1 million piece of property or have a $500,000 cabin. You can experience it with your family. You can celebrate your wedding anniversary. You can have a business meeting. And suddenly we've created a tourism opportunity in a county that needs it. The other thing that we're doing in this bill is that there will be money for a Niobrara boat launch. The Game and Parks Commission will match that with $1,820,000. This match between those two entities, the state and the commission, will restore a boat launch probably west of the Niobrara State Park. Sedimentation in the Missouri River is making it difficult to have that boat launch right outside of Niobrara because of all the silt and everything that's coming down the river. So we're probably going to have to work with the Corps of Engineers, place that a little bit west of Niobrara State Park. And the third, and I think most compelling picture you're going to see when it gets passed out here is the new and improved Wygond Marina. Right now, there are 100 boat slips there, and there's like a waiting list of 500 people. Like, it's unreal. South Dakota in Yankton is running circles around us, and we have this beautiful area that will go upward to 700 boat slips. Not only will that generate revenue for the Game and Parks Commission, the Game and Parks Commission represented in a January 6, 2022 letter to my office that they would cost share the expense of the Wygond Marina to the tune of $13,855,000. And so what I want to represent to you as it relates to Knox County, we truly have a public state of Nebraska, Game and Parks Commission, Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, public-private partnership that we can be proud of. And you're seeing these pictures right now. You're going to want to celebrate your anniversary here if you're still married. You're going to want to stay at this event center and this lodge, and it is going to be something that people will talk about for decades.
Thanks, Senator Flood. Senator Hilkeman.
Thank you, Mr. President. As one of the more senior members of this legislative body, I rise to share an experience that happened to me over in 1970. I was a young freshman teacher at Table Rock, Nebraska. I coached football, and I also coached or taught sciences. And this whole idea of putting an international airport between Lincoln and Omaha was one of the discussions. It was also a discussion. We were doing a lot of changes to Memorial Stadium at that time. There was actually some conversation of maybe we'll make a big stadium between Lincoln and Omaha. Maybe we could draw a professional team. I remember talking with my students about it. I was more concerned about my football team beating Lewiston or Diller or Ordell or Adams or some of those teams, because I was not involved in the politics. But I thought about the big picture. I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had this wonderful new stadium that we could possibly bring in a professional team? And I think one of the objections at that time actually came from our coach at the time. Coach Devaney was concerned that if we had a professional team, take it a little off of the Huskers, if you'll all remember that. I don't know exactly why it didn't pass and move forward. Senator McDonald alluded to it. There was a change of governors on that whole project. I know a lot of the people talked about how expensive this would be to do this. But maybe vision is expensive. And one of the things that they used to say is that, well, we'll never see anything like that ever happen. That might happen, but it isn't going to happen in my lifetime. Well, I think about it as I drive down that corridor every day, that if we'd have done something 50 years ago, bold, audacious, and spent some dollars, we probably wouldn't know the boundary lines between Omaha and Lincoln today. Our airport would be a huge, probably international, regional type of airport. But that's big picture thinking. Maybe we'd have had a big stadium there. Maybe we'd have had a professional team. Maybe not. We'll never know. But I do know that if we don't start sometime, none of us will ever see that. And so I can assure you that if we do this project, I know I will never see a lake between Lincoln and Omaha. That's probably not going to happen. But I know one thing, that if we don't start the process, if we don't start having the vision that was carried forth by Governor Teeman, I guess, at that time, and he was a young, aspiring governor, as you may remember, at least that's how I remember him. Indeed, if we don't start sometime, no one will ever see it. And with that, I'm strongly support both the committee amendment and this bill, and I hope that we move this forward. Let's move Nebraska forward. And we'll have it between Lincoln. We've got the thing going. McConaughey is a gift, as Senator has talked about the whole area around Niobrara. I have ridden my bike up around. You talk about some of the most beautiful areas of the state of Nebraska. Let's move forward, folks. Let's advance this. Let's see what will happen. If we don't start now, in 50 years, there'll be some other legislator here telling you, well, if we'd have done something back in 2022 when we could have done it for $15 billion, now it's going to cost us $40 billion. Think forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hilkeman. Senator McCollister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I support LB 1023 and AM 1914. And I want to congratulate the Speaker. Speaker Hilgers has done a magnificent job leading this committee, and so has Senator McDonald been as well. The leadership of these two gentlemen has been extraordinary. And I've been a part of the Star Wars Committee, and it was a great process. It was well done, covering about 9 months and a variety of meetings that we had for this process. And I think this bill is the result of that great process. One of the things I was most interested of being a 30-year member of the MUD Board of Directors, was how this bill would influence the water supply for Omaha and Lincoln. MUD currently has 3 water sources: the Florence Water Plant on the Missouri River, the Platte Southwest plant, and also their Platte West water treatment plant. The Platte West plant is just north of the Lincoln well field, and both cities pull water from that source. And of course, the Elkhorn River and the Loup River are the primary contributors to those water sources, not the Platte River. We should know that. And one of the things I think we need to look at down the road is that maybe MUD would supply water to Lincoln. MUD currently has a surplus of water, probably to the tune of 100 million gallons a day, and it'd be a simple matter to run a pipe from the Platte South plant to Lincoln and supply finished water to the city of Lincoln. And I think that would be a good solution for both towns, and it'd be far more economical than building a water treatment plant on any kind of river, on the Platte River by the city of Lincoln. So I think that would be a better solution for the city of Lincoln. What I do like about the Star Wars project is the way we can use the multiplier effect in those 3 areas that we're concentrating on. The area around Ogallala is prime for development. The folks on the eastern front range of Colorado could come out to the Big Mac and do some boating, and it's a beautiful facility, and I think that would be great. And of course, what we've seen with these photographs from Knox County, I think would give testament to the multiplier effect that would occur in that area around the Niobrara River. And of course, the lake between Omaha and Lincoln would be a multiplier effect as well. So I think that would, as Senator Hilgeman indicated, we need a plan. And I think it'd be an economic boon to the state of Nebraska if we push this bill forward, and I support it wholeheartedly. With that, I would relinquish the balance of my time to Senator Bosselman.
Senator Bostoman, you're yielded 1 minute 50.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator McCollister. I wanted to say a couple things on the mic real quick. Senator Lathrop asked about a website. That website is planpreserveplay.ne.com, all one word. PlanPreservePlayne.com. That's the website that anyone can go out there and look at, timelines, progress, some of the concepts that's being done with this. Those are all listed on that website. Again, it's PlanPreservePlayne.com. I would like to reiterate some of the things that Senator Clements had said earlier as it affects my district and the areas where we're at. This does provide some significant flood control in the projects that we have identified, both in the Schuyler area and the Wanahoo Creek area.
1 minute.
That provides, thank you, Mr. President, that provides some significant relief. And especially when you get down through the Wanahoo Lake and that below that area that then drains into the area where Ashland's at, the guard camp, those areas, it does help with that by holding back water, slowing it down. We did do a lot of public input. I contacted NRDs, administrators, individuals throughout the county, supervisors and others in my district. And I know we reached out. That was one of the things that we took a lot of time on, reaching out to as many people as we could in the areas that this potentially dealt with or affected. We had hearings across the state in those areas. And we also did other reach outs that HDR did and others did to make sure that we're really talking to the people that live there, that work there. And I will say that overwhelmingly in the majority of the areas that we have had overwhelming
Time,
support and
Senator.
response. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostoman and Senator McAllister. Senator McDonald, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to reiterate a couple things that have been said today, and going back to what Senator Lathrop had said, sometimes we get so far involved in something and we forget that we've been working on this for years, and we forget about some of the questions, of course, the public would have and when we're discussing things on the floor. So right now, as Senator Bostoman just read the website, please take a look at that. But the idea of what we're talking about today is a possibility of a reservoir. And sometimes the first steps are the toughest steps, but this is the first couple steps of 1,000 steps. And what we're talking about then with McConaughey and Niobrara is true projects, and what the Star Wars Committee worked on with HDR. And just want to keep that in perspective, that as we go through and we start talking about the studies, and if this moves on to select, the studies will be looking at a reservoir on the lower Platte, but real true projects are going to go forward that's going to help our state in the west and the north of our state. And again, we looked at a kind of a trifecta of how we can help the state. And definitely what we have up in Niobrara and McConaughey is truly special, and we're going to try to enhance that. And I also wanted to thank Senator Hughes. From day one, when I first started talking he was the first senator I discussed this with in 2017. And he told me there's an old joke, Mike, you go, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. And didn't quite understand what we were getting into. We've had a number of meetings with people. I got to tell you, meeting with people around the state of Nebraska, and they're willing to sit with us and discuss ideas and concerns and criticisms has really been rewarding as a member of the Star Wars Committee. And I think we could all say that as during this process. We've learned a great deal, and we're going to continue to listen about the lower Platte, but we are moving forward with some projects. Hopefully, if this bill goes forward, and what we've done in appropriations with improving the Niobrara and McConaughey. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Dorn.
Senator Dorn, you're yielded 2 minutes 50.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Would Speaker Hilgers yield to a question?
Speaker Hilgers, would you yield?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Senator Lathrop might have dwelled on part of this question. There's basically three parts to this proposal: McConaughey, Lewis and Clark, and then the Platte River one. McConaughey and Lewis and Clark, if this bill passes and the funding passes for it this year, those projects are basically a go.
There's no other material steps that I'm aware of for them to get started. They still need to do design and some permitting, but they're not at the scale we're talking about. Yes, they're basically a go.
Basically a go, and that still will take some time, but those projects then will be done in the future sometime.
That's correct.
The other thing I'd like you to talk a little bit more about, you talked a little bit early on about the public-private partnership and that, which maybe with the Platte River part of that. Currently, is there anything anything in this proposal that says this amount of money or this timeline or anything like that? It's other than a vision right now?
That's a good question. So if you look at our timeline that we were targeting is about 3 years, I think, on the outer limits to do this first phase. That's largely, I think, Senator Dorn, not driven by the public-private partnership analysis. It's really the appropriations. There's a certain amount of time to do a hydrology study the right way and an environmental impact study the right way, and to look at, identify the right land, the right opportunities to build the lake, the siting of it. That's one piece. I think within that, what this bill would do is would look at the private partnership, public-private partnership. We have to have a lot of questions to answer there, and to see how we would pencil out the private investment. How much would it be? How much would it cost? Where would those dollars come from? What does it look like? I'm very confident that those questions could be answered within the same time horizon as the studies.
One minute.
So that part of, thank you. So that part of the discussion, I call it, is still more out there yet on the table, and the forward-looking or forward-thinking part of this, as is, I call it the funding for the plat part of this, the proposal for the lake and all that. That is all in the future yet, and this body at some point in time will enact that or be making those decisions.
It's a great question, Senator Dorn. I'm glad you asked it. Absolutely. This body will have to weigh in a second time in order to make it happen. I'll give you an example. On the appropriation side, all we've asked the Appropriations Committee is to appropriate the $20 million for the study. It might take some more state dollars. It would take some more state dollars that are being now in cash. The only way that those cash reserve dollars would get appropriated is if a subsequent legislature came back and said, yes, we've looked at the plans, it's a go.
Thank you very much. Yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Dorn, Speaker Hilgers, and Senator McDonald. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I appreciate all the work that's been done on this bill and appreciate all the work that's been going forward. Obviously, it's just been laid out. There's kind of three different parts. Some projects in Lake McConaughey and up in Lewis and Clark seem pretty well close to fruition. So a lot of my focus and discussion has been focused on what I guess we're terming the Platte River component, or the between Lincoln and Omaha one. And for me, I think, if you could ask me if I could snap my fingers and give us one of the largest tourism bases or projects, of course, that'd be something that I'd want to support and would want to get to the end. For me, though, looking at some of the things, I think I have some of the similar questions in terms of access to the lake, maintenance to the lake, as well as overall impact to water. And specifically where we're talking about kind of the area that I think we're talking about, the drinking water and water supply for really the City of Lincoln, City of Omaha metro areas. I understand there's studies going to be going on before that point, but before I even start going down that line, I've just been listening to debate and wanting to know more about that. Because in the broad sense, of course, I think it'd be fantastic to have a great tourism location so nearby. At the same time, making sure it's publicly accessible, making sure it's responsible to the growth of the City of Lincoln, the growth of the City of Omaha, making sure it's responsible in all other aspects is something that I think we as a legislature need to cautiously consider. With that, Mr. President, I'm continuing to listen to debate. And with that, Mr. President, I will yield the balance of my time to John Kavanaugh, Senator Kavanaugh.
Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized at 3 minutes 10.
I think, there we go. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hansen. And I appreciate everybody's conversation. And a lot of topics have been covered about this. And I was sitting here looking actually what Senator Flood circulated on Knox County. And I actually had the opportunity to go up to Niobrara State Park this summer. I went on a tour of grazing lands up there with Senator Gregert. And I agree, it is a beautiful area and certainly benefit from investment. And this does look like a place I would, if I needed to have a wedding reception, I would consider it, maybe my anniversary, that lodge. But so we've had a conversation about the fiscal note. So the original fiscal note on this bill is now, with the amendment, would be struck and put into the general appropriations. We've had some conversations, but I just thought I'd read through it for folks. So Lake McConaughey road improvements is $6.8 million. Lake McConaughey gateway entrance, $1.1 million. Lake McConaughey marina, $34.3 million. Knox County slip marina improvements, $41.5 million. Knox County Niobrara landing, $2.8 million. Knox County Event Center, $42.4 million. Lower Platte flood mitigation, $25 million, which we haven't discussed very much. seems like the non-controversial part of this bill, I guess. Lower Platte Lake Planning Permit, 20 million, and Lower Platte Lake Capital Account, 26.1 million. And that's the part that a lot of people have been talking about. There's about, I think it's been said, about $200 million appropriation expected for this project. 46 million of it sounds like it would go towards the planning and some of the preparation of this lake that we're discussing that would be somewhere in the general vicinity of Gretna and Sarpy County, or somewhere along there, that land to be located in or near Sarpy County is what the amendment says. I know there may be some changes to that. And
1 minute.
Oh, thank you. Within the floodplain and flood right-of-way of the Platte River. So I guess I'm going to run out of time here to really get into any of the other things, but I am in the queue pretty soon, so I'll talk about it then. But I think that, well, I'll just reserve the rest of the time for when I come back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Matt Hansen. Senator McDonald would like to recognize 100 Catholics at the Capitol from all across the state. They are located in the North and South balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had a few questions for Speaker Flood, for Speaker Hilgers, if you please.
Speaker Hilgers, would you yield?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing this bill. I think it's creative and innovative. I hope that it does provide a great destination spot for people to come visit our state and for people in the state to visit as well. So one of the things I talked to you about off the mic was the question about, will there be public access? I've seen lots of, we do have lakes in various places, and I think you sort of spoke to it, but I don't think it can be confirmed enough that it should have access to the public. There should be a park that people could come and enjoy it as well.
No, I appreciate the question, Senator Pansy Brooks. It may be one of the most important questions I think that should be asked and answered as many times as needed. The bill itself includes language currently in the green copy talking about that the lake will remain a state asset. And I think that implies public access. We're going to add more language on a select file amendment to make triply sure, very explicit, that that is exactly what will happen. And I think the model we're looking at is something like a Lewis and Clark or something like a Lake McConaughey, where yes, there might be some private development. You might see a marina that's privately owned or a convention center that's privately owned, something like that. And you'd probably have to have some of that to be able to attract private investment. But at the end of the day, we couldn't ask for, or I would never come and ask for a dime of taxpayer money if in any way I thought that would close off an asset for the state of Nebraska to all Nebraskans.
Okay, I'm glad to hear there's an amendment, because I think state access could be seen as just like the state patrol has access to enforce laws against.
Well, I didn't think about that angle, Senator Pansy Brooks, and I appreciate you raising that. We'll look at see if we can tweak the language to be very explicit. It's not just emergency or first responders or the like, and actually the public. I think we've got public language in there, but we'll make sure that that's
good.
not the
I think
case.
that's great. And could you also, since I'm a Lincoln senator and there is, the Platte River, and so are you, the Platte River is important to us, but this is not going to really touch the Platte River. Is that correct?
It'll have some impact on the water table. Our initial analysis, Senator Pansy Brooks, will have a small incremental positive impact. That being said, I've spoken to Senator Wishart. She has my commitment for additional funding for a second source project, as well as an appropriations committee, some specific funding for their hydrology study. This project will never see the light of day if it has a negative impact on the city of Lincoln's water supply. I share your concerns for the long-term growth of our city, the future of our city, to make sure that that's protected.
Yeah, and of course, what I'm worried about is in a drought, there could be real issues for our water system in Lincoln.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
The
in
preliminary
Lincoln,
analysis was that actually in the low times and a drought-like conditions, certainly if it's too extreme, that's one thing, but that actually having the reservoir will have some positive impact. That's the kind of the positive impact our consultant team has indicated to us, but that will have to be confirmed through the actual studies that will be done.
Okay, those are my main questions. Thank you very much. And I will hope that we can see language that really makes sure that there is public access to something like this, because it's a fabulous idea and it should be available for all Nebraskans.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Speaker Hilgers.
Thank you, Senator Pansy Brooks and Speaker Hilgers. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I think this is my first time talking today. I rise uncertain about this bill. I am not opposed to the infrastructure investments in our water in this state. I think there's a lot of really important pieces to this bill. I do have concerns about the funding mechanism for it, and I have concerns about what our priorities are. I think it was Senator Lathrop who said yesterday that when the budget comes up, there will be conversation over how it is a moral document. And whenever we are allocating funds to anything, we should be looking at what our priorities are, what is our responsibility to the people of Nebraska. And I appreciate all of the conversation about the economic development around this, the recreational economic opportunities. But I just can't get over the fact that we aren't filing or applying for federal assistance, rental assistance right now. We are still in a pandemic. We still have high hospitalization rates. We still have people who are struggling. Schools are closing constantly. Parents are being pulled out of the workforce as a result. And so the fact that we are leaving all of this federal money untouched, and instead of prioritizing that in the conversation in this body, we are talking about a recreational lake. And I don't think that this isn't warranting a conversation, but there are people in Nebraska in crisis, and our governor is refusing to help them. And we have a bill on today's agenda that could have been first up today, people. We should be demanding that the governor take action. The Appropriations Committee already did. Every member of our Appropriations Committee sent a letter to the governor asking him to seek this money. I don't know how long people are going to be on this bill. I don't know how many times people are going to take time on this bill today or when it's on select or any other time. But I am so disappointed that this is what we are talking about for hours this morning and not requiring the governor to apply for this rental assistance. He has until the end of this month. There is nothing else on our agenda that is more time sensitive. We need the governor to do this. The people of Nebraska need the governor to do this. It is immoral that we aren't doing this. People are homeless because of this. We don't have eviction moratoriums. Thank goodness we passed that bill that allows for the tenant assistance program where lawyers can volunteer to help out people who are being evicted. I think today, I don't know actually if they do it on Wednesday. I know they do it on Thursdays and Mondays, but maybe Wednesday as well. But it's a huge program that has saved a lot of people in this state from being evicted, a lot of people from my community from being evicted. But we could be getting that money and we could be giving it to the landlords who need the money. It's their business. They rely on it. And the people need a home. What? So, sorry.
1 minute.
Thank you. I'm not going to take more time on this because, as I said, I am very frustrated that this is the conversation we're having. And I don't know if I'll ultimately vote for this bill or not, but right now I'm not going to vote for it because we need to help people in Nebraska stay in their homes. Like now, not like philosophically in the future. Now, today, tomorrow, the next day. Every single day that we don't apply for this rental assistance, another family is getting kicked out of their home. Children are sleeping in cars. We need to do this now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just wanted to be clear before, I know Rogue Leader is up after me. I just named Bossum in that, after he named Clements Rogue One. But just to be clear that there's two separate portions of the lower plat. The 25 million for flood control is a separate portion. So I didn't want anybody to conflate that was part of the lake. So we've talked about the public-private partnership and the concern, and again, I don't need to belabor that point. I know a lot of people have talked about that concern, and it is, I think, a very serious concern, which is why people have been talking about it so much. Senator Hilgers, Speaker Hilgers, and I have talked about it. There's, I think, going to be a change in the language going forward, but I will reserve judgment again until then. Other concerns that I have, though, about this bill and about the project going forward are the nature and structure of the oversight that we have that we're putting in place for the public-private partnership, and that a lot of the language in the bill is development oriented. Obviously, we're trying to entice. Basically, what's going on here is we're trying to create a structure for us to put in about $46 million, and then to entice another several $100 million in private investment that then will have that multiplier effect that everyone's talking about, which is achieved through development of houses along the lake, recreational tourism, and other types of ancillary benefits as a result of making that investment in the lake that we're talking about on the lower plat. However, the concern that I articulated has about making sure there's public access has to do with the fact that if we become too focused on the economic return on that investment, we can lose sight of the other things that we're supposed to be looking at. And I think a lot of people have addressed that. Senator Lathrop pointed out that we need to see the hydrological studies, and that is a note I have to myself here where we explicitly said on page 4 going into page 5, it's the intent of the legislature that the lake be at least 3,600 surface acres. So explicitly saying the size of the lake, that no dam shall be constructed on the main channel of the Platte River in order to construct the lake, that no city or village or any part thereof shall be flooded in order to construct the lake. But we don't explicitly say in there, one, that the lake should remain public access, that the lake shall not be built if has a detrimental effect to water quality, flood control, or environmental concerns. And so I think those type of things should be considered as we go forward, because I know we've talked about them. They were stated at the hearing, which is one of the reasons I flagged it in the bill, is that it was one of the things that I heard at the hearing that gave me, alleviated some of my concerns about the project. And Speaker Hilgers said on the mic today that we will not go forward with this project if the environmental studies say that it'll have a detrimental impact, if the water studies say that it'll have a detrimental impact to Omaha and Lincoln and other communities. But I think that it's important that if we're going to explicitly say how big the lake needs to be, maybe it's also worthwhile putting in the bill that we say that we're not going to do it if it has these negative impacts to our community and to our communities and to our state environment. And so that's one of the concerns that I've flagged going forward for any amendments to this.
1
for
minute.
The speaker. Thank you, Mr. President. I think I'm going to run out of time here. Another one is and this is a concern, I guess, a question. Maybe I don't have time for the speaker, but the part about on section 5 or page 5, section 4, notwithstanding any other provisions of law, no land within the Lake Development District as designated by the Department of Natural Resources pursuant to section 3 of this act shall be annexed. And I guess my question is, if we're developing houses that are near, say, Gretna, Nebraska, and perhaps even in the Gretna School District, I'm wondering why those houses and those residences couldn't end up within the city limits of Gretna, which I think is one of the faster growing communities. I don't know if that's a concern. It's just a question that I have with my 1 minute left, and I will push the light and get back on and see if I can find out the answer to that in the interim. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Stinner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I know it's right before lunch hour, so maybe I can say some things that will upset you so you won't overeat. Anyhow, I want to thank Star Wars Committee. I know they spent summer times. They spent a lot of thought in these projects. A couple of them are tangible projects that I think are worthy. But here's where I differ. We have to think big, and I don't mind thinking big. But this was supposed to have been covered by ARPA. This $1 billion that are coming in is supposed to be covered by ARPA. There was a $50 million request by the governor in his recommended budget. Do you know where it's coming out of? I'll report to you where it's coming out of. You're going to spend $120 million of general funds and $80 million of cash reserve. Do you see ARPA in that? And here's the $50 million request. If you want to look up on page 288 of the pronouncements that they sent out, it talks about dams and drinking water, and that's what we were kind of hanging our hat on. But there's a time limit as to when you can use those funds. Think about the lake. Think about the permitting process. Think about all of the things that have to go into that, and think about the fact you have to spend it quickly. So anyhow, the Treasury says, Treasury expects that in many cases, it would be considerably more difficult to demonstrate that the construction of a new dam or reservoir would be necessary for the purpose of provisions of drinking water than is the case. And now, how many times have you heard drinking water in this? You don't think the Treasury is going to come in and look at what we have said? We're talking about recreation. But in any event, dams and reservoirs, serving the purpose for a particular population, particularly giving opportunities to meet the drinking water needs through water reuse and conservation efforts. For these reasons, and given a relatively short period of availability of funds, makes new dams and reservoirs and construction of these funds less likely. Treasury has limited the scope of the final rule to dam and reservoir rehabilitation projects. This is not a rehabilitation project. That is why $50 million came out of ARPA. So what we have to do here, folks, is kind of settle in. Is this a priority? $1 million is a big time number for me. When you put 200 of them together, when you put 500 of them on top of that, now you got my attention. Is this really how we want to spend money? We have two tangible projects I think probably deserve some merit. But then Senator Hilgers and I talked about floodway. I can tell you about a floodway. The city of Fort Collins got reassigned floodplain and floodway. In a floodway, you are not allowed to have buildings because it is a high probability you'll have a flood. Structures will get torn down and it'll take out bridges, et cetera. So in Fort Collins, they actually tore down half their downtown because they were in a floodway. This proposal talks about floodways. It talks about floodplains. It talks about, and we're talking about economic development around it. I know Senator Hilgers is trying to address that and saying that the floodway will be encompassed in this lake. And I'll ask Senator Hilgers, is that a correct statement? And you may want to elaborate on it as well.
Senator Hilgers, would you yield?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Senator Stinner. It is a correct statement. And to elaborate, the reason why we looked at the floodway was largely because we're trying to avoid existing economic development. We want to stay away from the city of Ashland. We want to stay away from other neighborhoods and communities that built up. Thank you, Mr. President. And the advantage of a floodway is you can't build, exactly to your point, but you can't build up, but there's no restriction to build down. And so what we are looking at is the floodway for the core of where the lake would go. In other words, you could put the lake there. Now, you wouldn't build the development around it. You're absolutely right, Senator Stinner. And so as you look sort of in concentric circles beyond the floodway to the floodplain and then out of the floodplain, that is where the development would go. But there would, and you're right, you can't build, but that's precisely why we looked at the floodway, because that's the place that's encumbered. You can't build there anyway. We're not interrupting existing economic development.
Is it the Corps of Engineers that will basically oversee this, the permitting process for this, or is it some other federal body that will have to agree to it? And did the committee consult the Corps of Engineers as to any kind of problems or issues?
So you're going a little bit outside of my subject matter expertise. Certainly
Time,
the court.
Senator. Thank you, Senator Stinner and Speaker Hilger. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been listening to the debate around this bill, and I share the goal of wanting to expand tourism in Nebraska, but I'm a little bit skeptical of this method. I'm skeptical of this bill. And I'm skeptical of some of the claims that have been made by supporters, that this is going to be something that becomes a huge tourism pull, that it helps with brain drain in Nebraska, that it helps us compete with Yankton, South Dakota. You know, I think in some ways we're thinking too big, in some ways we're thinking too small. I'm also concerned and skeptical that this will end up being a $200 million plus, I mean, I don't think it's going to be just that, to a handful of contractors and engineers who are going to take that money and crunch their little numbers and do some work and find out that this might not even be a feasible thing. And I know that the committee has already done work to examine that, but I'm just skeptical that the problems to tourism and attraction and retention in Nebraska is a lake. It's not anything that I'm hearing from my constituents. When I ask them how we attract and retain talent in Nebraska, I think we just need to champion issues that matter to young people, like legalizing cannabis, like raising the sub-minimum wage in Nebraska of $2.13 an hour. You know, when restaurants start opening around that lake, those servers could be making $2.13 an hour. Like, is that a great thing for our state? Investing in public transit, defending reproductive rights. I have a close friend in one of the departments at the University of Nebraska Lincoln here, and she was telling me that they've had the opportunity to hire more faculty in the last several years, and they've been trying to get more women in the faculty, and they've made offers to dozens of qualified women, and they keep hiring, in the end, conservative men, because those are the people that, frustratingly to the department, they're able to get to move here to Nebraska and take a job. And they've just been turned down by all of these different women. And the reason they don't want to be here, it comes down to, is the culture that we have in this state. And a lake is not going to fix that, colleagues. There are so many lower cost things that Nebraskans are asking for. And it's perplexing to me. If you could see it on my face, I'm just, you know, kind of like, we've debated things like paid family leave, like cannabis legalization, just medicinal, not even talking about adult use, raising the minimum wage, support for public transportation infrastructure, ending the death penalty, making sure we don't ban women's health care. Like, all of this stuff is what actually matters to people who are looking for a place to settle down. And this is borne out by research done by the Chamber of Commerce, by research done by the ACLU, by research done by Nebraska Appleseed, by research done by the Platt Institute, all kinds of groups in Nebraska who are concerned about growing our state and our workforce and our economy are coming to the same conclusions, which, whatever lens you look through ideologically, it ends up being, just listen to young people. Listen to the people who are leaving the state, and listen to the people who don't want to come to the state, like all of those women that decided not to move to Nebraska for a job at the university.
1 minute.
Thank you. For years, we have tried to get paid family leave and medical leave passed, and it's been filibustered. And that would be a truly forward-thinking investment, and something that might actually make people want to stay or come here. You know, equity and rights for LGBTQ and trans Nebraskans, for women. And I also share concerns that other colleagues have mentioned about the environmental impact to the water in Nebraska. I think that we're facing a future where water is going to be one of the most precious resources that we have. And I think that we need to be thinking beyond the legacy of a few men in this body, or the impact of the next 15 or 20 years. and think more about the cultural changes and quality of life investments in the infrastructure of our state that need to be made before we start.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the speaker would yield to some more questions, I'd like to have an exchange with him.
Speaker Hilgers, would you yield?
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, can we talk about the idea of a public-private partnership as it relates to this lake that we're talking about today?
Absolutely.
Can you tell us what that would look like? And let me preface my question so that you can maybe have an answer that's responsive to it. When I hear the debate on the floor this morning, what I hear is that the state will own the lake and we're entering into a public-private partnership. So here is the skeptic. The state's going to be responsible for digging a hole that will create a lake in this area in the floodplain, and that the developers will then have the lots and be selling the lots for $200,000 or something, and we'll call it a public-private partnership because they're going to put the sewers and the roads in to the lots that they'll be selling. Tell us a little bit more about what this bill provides for in that relationship so that we know we're not doing a situation where we spend all the money to create this and the developers make all the money selling lots.
Appreciate the question, Senator Lathrop. So in the first instance, it's important that the language doesn't even require the department. The public side, the department is the one that is tasked with and empowered to go and try to develop the lake. That's point number one. It doesn't even require the department to enter into any kind of private partnership. And we did that in part because we don't know exactly what would the pro forma look like, as it were, to be able to entice and bring in that investment. But your second, so I'll talk about that in a second. But the last thing you said, I think, is really critical. The state in no way is the state, either through this bill, the appropriations bill, or in any way contemplated the state would put in more right now than the $20 million we're asking for the actual design, study, and permitting. That's it. Beyond that, it would take a subsequent legislature to be able to approve an additional dime of money. So the first thing is the lake, as it's designed, there's no additional state funds. So the premise of saying or suggesting, I'm not saying that's what you were suggesting, but I think it's important to say that the state in no way is it intended the state would put in a lot of money into this thing. How the private part, I don't know. We want to get this phase one started to get the right people at the table to see what it would look like. You could envision a lot of different ways that this could look like, but it has to work within the framework of ensuring public access to the whole lake. Could a private developer want to build a convention center or a marina that's open to the public, but they are able to capture the revenues? Those are things that maybe you have seen in other state parks or other areas like Lake McConney. I don't know precisely what it would take, but in either case, this legislature would have, in the Department of Natural Resources, would have ultimate gating responsibility to ensure that whatever it is justified going forward. So that answers your question.
Thank you. Let me ask a question then. If all we're doing now is coming up with a design or a concept for this lake at $10 million, did any of the work you did this summer give you any idea what it would cost to dig a lake 30 feet deep, the size of Okoboji?
We had
what's that ticket look like if we were to do it today, if we had the money and we were going to pay for it and start tomorrow? What would we spend to take 30 feet of, presumably sand, and pull it out of this area and create the lake? What's that number look like?
That's a great question. So the back of the envelope math that when we talked to some people who are in this business, suggested it would be around $500 million to $1 billion, depending on not just to take the dirt out, but maybe develop some of the surrounding infrastructure. So that's sort of, if we were all to do it at once. But playing into your question about the public-private partnership, some of this might get sequenced over time. You might do half the lake to start, the second half later, just kind of depends. But to answer your question, maybe $500 million to $1 billion.
What do we bring to the table as a state on this? I get that the work that you guys have done, I appreciate. The concept that you brought to the table, but what are we going to do going forward? Because a developer could do this if they wanted to, right? You find a bunch of developers and they think, let's make a lake. They're doing that all over Valley, right?
Yeah, some
In
of
a
those,
very
it's
small
a good
scale.
question, Senator Lathrop. I think there's some of those lakes are smaller. I think in this case, sometimes the state is the entity that's
Time,
got
Senator. Thank you, Senator Lathrop. And Speaker Hilgers. Seeing no one in the queue, Senator Bostoman, you're recognized to close on AM 1914.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for everyone who contributed to the discussion this morning. This is a significant projects throughout the state and my district and other districts that really have transformational opportunities for a lot of the areas that we're talking about. McConaughey, Niobrara areas, we learned a little bit more about some of the interaction with, I believe it's the Ponca tribe, and things that they can bring to the table to help with the things that they do in their area as far as powwows and other events they have. There's just not room for people to come there to stay when they have these events. This is going to provide that. We're hearing about boat access and access to the waters in the Niobrara area where it doesn't exist today. And we need those type of things, because if you look across the river, there's a lot of development that's going on over there. And Senator Flood spoke to that significantly and handed out a lot of things about what those concepts are, what those things will be in those areas. One thing in AM 1914 that I spoke to the speaker on, I think that you need to understand or recognize as well, the committee states till 2026 right now. It extends it out. And that's important to me because that continues to have this body's involvement in this projects. So it doesn't end early or at the end of this year, that it extends it out to 2026 to make sure we continue to have that oversight. Again, these are very important projects for the state. These are things that to build our communities, to build areas that need that development. We had overwhelming support for this in the communities and the areas that this works with, and these areas that are affected. Plus, it is in my district, in Saunders County especially, and up in Colfax County, we do provide some significant flood protection. So with that, I would ask you for a green light on 1914 and then underlying Bill 1023. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostoman. Members, the question is the advancement of Amendment 1914. All those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted that wish? Record, Mr. Clerk.
29 ayes, 2 nays on adoption of the committee amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, your Committee on Appropriations, chaired by Senator Stinner, refers Legislative Bill 1193 to general file. Additionally, your Committee on Revenue, chaired by Senator Linehan, reports Legislative Bill 1261 to general file with committee amendments. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 450A as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Amendments to be printed, Senator Lathrop to LB 1011 and Senator Brewer to LB 709. New LR, Senator Merman, LR 321, that'll be laid over. Additionally, Senator McKinney, LR 322, 323, 324, 325, and 326. Those will all be laid over. Explanation of vote from Senator DeBoer. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Members, is there any further discussion on the advancement of the bill? Seeing none, Senator Hilgers, you're recognized to close on LB 1023. 1023.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all, colleagues, for the great discussion on the mic, off the mic. There's some great questions. I want to particularly thank Senator Lathrop for his questions, and Senator DeBoer, and Senator Pansing Brooks, Senator Wishart, and others and Senator John Kavanaugh, who've added to this debate. I'm very grateful for it. It'll make the bill better. At the end of the day, this is a generational opportunity for us to really change the trajectory of the state and provide a new recreational opportunity for the citizens of the state of Nebraska. And I'm grateful for your support, and I'd ask for your green light on LB 1023. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Hilgers. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1023 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have all voted that wish? Record, Mr. Clerk.
29 ayes, 4 nays on advancement of the bill.
LB 1023 advances. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, series of name adds: Senator Bostar to LB 717 and Senator Aguilar to LB 933. Additionally, Senator Jacobson would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess until 1:30. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are in recess.